Good afternoon. We'll get started. I appreciate everyone being here. People can move in to the auditorium, find a seat, because we've got a lot of good information for everybody today. Put together a really good program, so I do appreciate people being here. I'm Robert Lancaster. I'm the Assistant Dean of Experiential Education here at the Law Center. I also am the director of the Parole and Reentry Clinic, which is a program that we started back in 2014, where students gain skills in being lawyers by representing individuals who have an opportunity for early release, either on parole or pardon. So our students here at the Law Center are engaged in this important work. I also have the privilege and honor to be president of the board of directors for the Parole Project, who is co-sponsoring this program today with the Parole and Reentry Clinic. Also co-sponsor is the Visiting Room Project. So the program today is really in two parts. The first part, we will watch some interview clips from the Visiting Room Project and then have an opportunity to have a discussion with a few folks who were formerly incarcerated. And then we have a second portion of the program where we will talk about law policy, changes in the law that relate to the creation of excessive sentencing in Louisiana and what some possible solutions to excessive sentencing might be. I know some of you in the audience are interested in getting continuing legal education credit for your time here. If that's the case, there is forms available for you outside on the table. So don't leave without completing one of those CLE forms and turning them in on the box that's available to you. Also, during our panel discussions, we will entertain questions from the audience, and we welcome and encourage questions from all of you in the audience. You'll find at the end of each row, there should be some note cards available to you. So what we're going to do for questions, that if you do have questions that come up during either of our panels, write your question on that note card, hold it up, and Kelly Garrett, where's Kelly? Kelly's going to be watching for hands, and she'll come and take that card and bring it up to the moderator of the panel. So we'll be able to take your questions that way. So what I want to do is turn it over to Professor Marcus Concar from Loyola University, who's really the creator of the Visiting Room Project. He's a professor of sociology at Loyola, and he's been working on this project really since 2016 is when you got started. So I'll turn it over to Marcus.
Good afternoon. It's so nice to see so many familiar faces of folks who are in the project, with the Parole Project, and even folks from DOC. It's great to see Francis Abbott here, who was, oddly enough, at Angola as a classification employee there when I started the project, and was quite helpful to me, actually. So thank you for taking the time to be here. My name's Marcus Concar. I'm very grateful to LSU, to Robert, for inviting us, and for the Parole Project to make this space available. I'm the chair of the Sociology Department at Loyola, and also one of the creators of the Visiting Room Project, which we are going to screen for you today. The Visiting Room Project is a multimedia storytelling project at its heart. It features filmed interviews with over 100 people serving life without parole, and the focus is on life without parole sentences. It was filmed mostly at the Louisiana State Penitentiary at Angola, and it is the largest collection of first-person testimonials of people serving this sentence in the world. In the face of recent declining incarceration rates across the nation, And despite remarkably low recidivism rates for folks released from serving life sentences, where that's a possibility, the proportion of incarcerated folks sentenced to die in prison has been steadily climbing for decades now. In the last 3 decades, the life without parole population has quadrupled. There's really something happening with that particular extreme sentence. Louisiana, of course, leads the country in life without parole sentences. But the men I interviewed at Angola are representative of the 55,000 people who are serving life sentences across this country. For my project, they were all convicted of murder, which in Louisiana carries a mandatory life sentence, as you know. They are disproportionately black. They were convicted when they were very young. They tend to have served quite a bit more time than the average population. And they're significantly older than most incarcerated folks, serving shorter sentences. The oldest contributor to the Visiting Room Project was incarcerated as a juvenile in 1953 when Dwight D. Eisenhower was president. Miraculously, a few of the folks I interviewed for the project are here with us today. That's really the happiest part of this day for me. I'll introduce them after a short screening of the project, and you'll have a chance to have a conversation with them. You know, we dreamed up this project after a series of conversations that I had with a man that many of you know and love named Calvin Duncan, who spent over 28 years in prison before being released with help from the Innocence Project New Orleans. Calvin came to Angola with a 9th grade education and just threw himself into studying law. When I met him about a decade ago, when he came home, I was analyzing all of the data that I could find on life without parole, aging, recidivism, and so forth. And when I showed him all these numbers, including the reoffending folks for folks who did come home after serving very long sentences, he wasn't surprised at all. And yet, my data wasn't really resonating very well. He just knew it. He knew it because he knew the human beings and the stories behind the data that I was showing him. He grew up with these folks at Angola, had worked on their cases as inmate counsel, which gives you, I think, a particular vantage point into these things. And he saw these changes over decades. I'm a sociologist. I prefer to stay in my lane when it comes to things like this, and I like data. And I tend I'm trained to think of social life through a very structural lens, conducive to objectivity. And so I like quantitative data. And I realized there was something really clearly absent, something missing from this picture that I was drawing with the data. And that is the human stories behind the data. Most people don't know about the changes people go through behind prison walls because we have no access to them. And one of the consequences, again, I say this quite a bit because it's true, one of the consequences of designing prisons to keep people in is that they also keep the rest of us out. And the walls are not porous. So folks who are incarcerated, for the most part, remain abstractions to us. And then we're, of course, naturally skeptical of things like transformation and rehabilitation because we don't have an opportunity to see it. Unless, of course, you work in that environment or have a loved one in that environment, you tend not to have that vantage point. We focus on the crime of conviction, and we have trouble moving past it, and that's just human nature. If we want to understand the experiences of those that we have othered and cast to the sidelines of society, if we want to make empathetic connections with them and be reminded of just our common humanity, then we need to visit with them. We need to hear from them. We need to hear their stories and see them as the whole human beings that they are. And in the absence of those kinds of encounters, they remain data points. We remain trapped in our own set of assumptions, and in fact, our worldview contracts. So Calvin and I realized that we had to find a way to tell the story in a different way, and we decided we needed to get into the prison and get these stories out from the folks themselves. So we designed the project initially for an academic audience as an ethnographic project, and after quite a bit of effort, I was given access to begin recording interviews in a private classroom in the main prison education building. And so I'd like to share some of those interviews. We have some profiles from those longer interviews from the website, and then we'll have a short break. I want to introduce you to Sandra Starr, and then we'll open it up for the panel. Okay? So do you...
When I was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole at the age of 22, my young mind didn't...
Start it again.
When I was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole at the age of 22, my young mind didn't really understand it. I thought I'd get a chance to go home after a decade. Many years ago, Louisiana had what they called the 10-6 rule for lifers. After you serve 10 years and 6 months in prison, staying out of trouble, working hard, the warden would recommend you for parole and the board and governor would release you. That's the way it was for most of the 20th century. By the time I arrived at Angola in 1987, I learned that things had changed. The changes were set in motion in 1972 when the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that the death penalty was unconstitutional. Louisiana and other states rushed to make sure that people formerly on death row wouldn't be given any chance of release. 10-6 was brought to a halt and lifers were blocked from parole. There were other changes going on at the time, too. Politicians were running tough on crime platforms, saying the solution to the crime problem was giving people long sentences to make sure that they never return to society. They took discretion away from judges and parole boards and imposed long mandatory sentences instead. In Louisiana in 1979, just 1 year before I was arrested, lawmakers abolished parole eligibility for us lifers altogether. Guys who thought they would eventually have a chance to go home if they had shown the capacity to change and be rehabilitated were suddenly faced with a new reality. Life in prison. Death by incarceration. Lawmakers kept growing the list of offenses that could get you mandatory life in prison without parole, from murder to selling heroin or acting as a getaway driver during a robbery gone wrong. By the time I reached Angola, the number of lifers sentenced to die in Louisiana prisons had doubled in less than a decade. 3/4 of those sentenced to life were black, like me. We were condemned to die on a former plantation where our ancestors had been enslaved. There is no doubt that most of us have done some terrible things and made terrible mistakes. There are some of us that were wrongfully incarcerated. Either way, without a chance to return to society, we are lost to the world. After 20, 30, or even 40 years, regardless of whether we changed or found ways to redeem ourselves, we are still here. Today, there are nearly 5,000 of us serving life without the possibility of parole in Louisiana. There are more of us per capita than any other state in the country or any place in the world. Many of us are old now, so old and so sick that Angola had to create a hospice program. A lot of us are volunteering to the hospice program, nursing people who, just like us, came here young and are dying in prison. Hospice gives us a glimpse of what we are headed for. When I first got to Angola, there was only one cemetery, Point Lookout, but now there are two, and the second one's almost full. Most people only hear about us when crime happens, but we have changed, and we invite you to sit with us now, decades later, to meet the people we have become. Like Darryl Waters, who is serving life without parole, says, There are everyday people behind these walls who love, who get sad, who hurt, who are happy, who have dreams. In the visiting room, you can hear us tell our stories in our own words.
My name is Theodore Givens. Some people call me Bojack. I'm originally from St. Louis, Missouri. I'm 66 years old. I was born April the 12th, 1951. I was born and raised in Missouri. I came to New Orleans. I caught a second-degree murder charge in New Orleans. I was extradited from California back to New Orleans. I've been confined 41 years, 1 month, and 17 days as we speak now. How I wound up down the road, wrong road, it's a great mystery. And the reason why I say that is because my father was first black to play football at Washington University. My mother taught school at Harris Teachers College. I went to state playing baseball and football. I was in school. I hadn't graduated, and a guy I thought was my best friend was in a crap game. Somebody came in there and tried to rob him. I grabbed the gun, discharged, got put out of all public schools and Catholic school. So when you say, what was my life like? Well, everybody I associated with was in school. I pulled away from that particular group because I got bored and tired. So the only other persons I knew was the people in the streets. So I gradually, started hanging with the wrong crowd. And I think that's the biggest thing. People not in school, what is they doing? The wrong thing. But getting back again, what I want to say, the biggest mistake I think I made is that I felt I was a disappointment to my parents. So when I sat down at the dinner table and I looked at my dad, looked at my mom, and I'm out of school, I just seemed like I hurt them so bad. And I pulled away from them to the street. And I didn't understand the significance of a family and love then. I didn't know that they was gonna love me regardless and help me work through my problem. And I wound up with a second-degree murder charge. Then, that's the difference between the 24-year-old and the 66-year-old now. I understand that everything that I do, it don't just affect me. It just has a side effect to everybody around me. I didn't understand that getting in trouble was gonna affect my parents as well as it did the victim parents. You see, so everybody be affected by my particular action. About the victims, they'll never forget it. Just even if they forgave me, that don't mean that they forget. Every time they sit down at dinner and there's an empty chair there, it hurts because they done lost a loved one. Every time they walk through their living room and on the mantle, they see a photograph of their son or their daughter and they missing, that hurt. There's a wound there. So it's hurt there. So I understand. I can understand that. You would like to sit down and talk with them face to face and express it and ask them for their forgiveness. A crime happened, the guy got locked up, he got sentenced to life. Out of sight, out of mind. You don't know nothing else about it. So how can you see the changes in it? How can you know whether or not he changed? It's that last memory how they seen him. It's the only thing that they remember. a young, violent person. They don't see nothing else because they haven't been exposed to it. I went to the library when I first come up here, and I asked the librarian would he order a typing manual from LSU for me, and he ordered it for me. I wanted to teach myself how to type. My goal was to be able to out-type any woman. Okay, and that's how I wound up getting different clerks' jobs. I joined the CPR team way back. I worked my way up to instructor, then I worked my way all the way up as far as I could go, instructor trainer. And by that, I trained people to become instructors, teach classes. Through that, I went out in society, trained firemen, bus drivers, school teachers. I took up sign language, went through the sign language class, graduated from 3 different levels. I was an inmate counselor, like a paralegal, help people regain their freedom. I went to so many classes, taught so many classes. I enjoyed that, trying to help people get their freedom. I tried to get into carpenter school. They told me I had a life sentence. I couldn't attend the school, so I ordered me different books and taught myself. And now I'm teaching people by carpentry. You know, I'm the supervisor, well, I'm the coordinator of the carpenter shop at the main prison now. And I build everything for everybody. I said, now they got a bunch of lifers over in this hospital, this hospice program. This is not their regular job. They volunteer for this. Now, excuse the expression, but they wash all up the crack of another man's ass, all up under his nuts and all. It doesn't care what nationality or race he is. Is that man faking? Have that man changed? He might have been a character when he got here, but this man done developed character. This man done developed compassion. He might have never had that when he first come here. But you look at him now, you know, and you ask yourself, is he faking it? How you gonna fake that? Come on, man. I mean, just because he walked with a Bible, I mean, don't prejudge that man. You know, I mean, but the public don't see that. You got a lot of lifers that take and turn around and guys that's hungry and don't have anything. They put together, get this guy a toothbrush, toothpaste, deodorant, soap, give him a sack. They don't see that. They don't come interview them. You got lifers. See all them schools over there on that compound? That's lifers teaching them classes. That ain't no free personnel teaching that class. Them lifers teaching that. But nobody interview them on that. They don't get a chance. They don't get a chance to come up on a parole board and put out a resume and let people see what they done accomplished since they've been there. You know, it come down to not so much what you done done, but what have you become? What have you become since you've been there? But nobody get a chance to see that. You don't have the opportunity to let nobody see that. You know, you ask yourself, when you was 16, 17 years old, are you the same person? Did you even think the same way you did now? No. That's human nature. People change.
I never did any time. This is my first time ever doing time. First time ever sitting in front of a judge and got life. My name is Terry West. I'm convicted for first-degree murder, and I was arrested when I was 20 years old. Well, I served on 21 years, about 3-4 months. Well, I was raised by my mother, single parent, kind of off and on with my own stepfather moved, was staying with us. Well, after that, when my mother met another guy named Kenny, that's why I say that's my dad. You know, even though I knew my father, but that was the guy, Kenny, he came along. He had a drinking problem, but he was beautiful until you drank. He was the perfect father, get you up in the morning, take you crabbing and take you on little side jobs, cleaning shades and painting houses for people. And, you know, it kind of like take me to the barber shop, get my hair cut. And when he would introduce us to his friends, oh, that's my son, Terry, you know, and that kind of made me feel good. And I'm like, okay, that's what I've been wanting. So I kind of like got real close to him. But when he drank, he'd jump on my mama and go to fighting her real bad. And that's where we butt heads at, you know. And it came a time where I almost hurted him because he was beating my mama one day and my mom just was crying. And by the grace of God, I pulled the gun out on him and the gun didn't go off because he was so drunk till he grabbed the gun and put it to his chest and clicked the trigger. You know, you won't kill me, you won't kill me. And I'm like, I thought I did, but when I seen him do that, I was like, oh, look, he scared all of us. But that was the breaking point where my mama knew she had to separate from him because either he was gonna hurt her or one of us was gonna hurt him. And I was real protected of my mother because that's all I knew. And her thing was, we all we got. From where I was born and raised, you had to earn your right to go to the store for your mama. If you wasn't tough, they gonna take your mama money. You couldn't go to the swimming pool unless you had to fight. You had to earn respect just to get in the pool. Even to go to school. You had to fight to go to school. So I had to be tough. I got kicked out of school because of the violence that I was bringing, the kind of trouble that I was bringing to school. You know, I had got into drugs real young, and I was using drugs in the 5th grade. You know, I got put out of elementary school from smoking on rocks and weed. And so when I carried that on to middle school, I was into the streets. I was one of my mama kids that got away. I got shot in my head when I was 14 years old. And that was like, I just spiraled out, you know, and I got shot like, in 90, I got shot in my head. 91, I got shot again. 92, I got shot again. 93, I got paralyzed from neck down. And I stayed in the hospital like a year and something, being a paraplegic from neck down. And by the grace of God, I come out of that. And in 95, when I started walking again, I ended up getting shot up again in 95. And I just didn't know which way to go. You know, I always wanted better, but I just ain't know which way to go because of the life and where I was stuck at, you know. I feel a lot of remorse for that because it was a good friend of mine. He was a good friend of mine. He was a good person. That was my time. I put that with, that's when I started living. When I met them. When I met him, I started living. Before I was trapped. I couldn't be with my children. I couldn't go to clubs. I couldn't hang on the corner. I couldn't be in the public without having a gun on side me. When I met him, it was like my life have changed because he was the type of person that say, if you got a gun on you, don't get in my car. You know, I think about his kids all the time because it was like mine. I was Uncle Terry. And in the beginning, I used to always have dreams about, you know, and it used to haunt me that they say, look at Uncle Terry, he killed Daddy, and pulling his son away from me because his son was so used to me. But his older daughter's pulling him away, saying, he killed Daddy. You know, so that's something that haunted me, and it shouldn't have happened, you know? It shouldn't have happened. Wow. The Terry that they brought, I was a child. I was a man child. I just was a scared man, really. I was real scared in a lot of ways, you know, because I knew I had to read books and stuff to get out, study my case. And by me not being educated enough, I couldn't read that well at the time. And I couldn't spell that well. I knew I was stuck. And I truly believe, even then, that if I would have been educated, if I'd have went to school, if I'd have even knew how to read and write at that time, I know I wouldn't have never went down that road because I always wanted better. I treasure life way more now. I know the beauty of it now. I know the importance of it. I know other people need me. Not just my kids, but my mother needs me. Even the people around here need me. I don't think about me first. I think about everybody around me, then I think about me. Because I know if everybody around me all right, then I'm all right. At one time, you know, me being shot 5 different occasions, I'm still alive for a reason. Maybe this might be the reason God have for me, to be here for the young guys that's coming here. I don't know, but if it is, I'm gonna embrace it because that take place anywhere. It ain't about where you die at. It's just, I wanna be out there with my family, but if I have to die here, after being here 21 years, I've been here longer than I've been with my family. So sometimes I question where I'm from, you know, because I've been here longer. I've been knowing these people longer than I've been knowing my family. So it wouldn't be all that bad dying with them sometimes, you know? Sometimes I be tempting to write my mom and them and say, if I die, leave me here. Don't come get me. Don't bury me with them. I don't know them no more. Bury me with my friends.
My name is Jeffrey Dale Hilburn. In the penitentiary, I'm referred to as Jeffrey Dale because the state kind of goes by your first name. I spent my life going by Dale. I was born January 3rd, 1967, in a small northeast Louisiana town called Bosco. I was convicted of second-degree murder in Richland Parish in 1993. My mother and father both grew up dirt poor, really. My mother's descended from a heavy Acadian stock. You're familiar with Acadians? My mother was a true Acadian with a mixture of Acadian, actually a little Chinese, from the very first Chinese doctor to live in Louisiana, and a lot of Indian. My father was mainly Scotch-Irish, from what we know, and a lot of Indian. Family come from out of the Appalachian Mountains. My father was a mechanic. My mother was a housewife and a store owner. We had a little general mercantile in northeast Louisiana. It was kind of a legendary place at the time. They were very well known. They were both Will Rogers types people. Everybody knew them. Everybody loved them. They never met a stranger. They were very outgoing people. And to this day, still the only two people I've ever called heroes in my life. I've served a little over 26 and a half years thus far. After my mother passed away, I talked my dad into only coming once a month. They used to come twice a month. Never fail. And when you consider that it is about a 500-mile round trip, and their ages, my parents were both near their 50s when I was born. My father kept coming religiously. In fact, until a month before he passed, about a month before he passed in 2013. Since then, I get frequent visits, as I would refer to them. They come 3 or 4 times a year, which is, to me, is still great. But it's a lot of people get visits weekly or 2 or 3 times a month. I get maybe 4 or 5 visits a year now, which I still consider frequent. As the Angolite, we serve as kind of a chronicler of Angola's daily and historical perspectives. My early morning is spent reading up on news information, trying to make sure that you stay current on issues of not just criminal justice, but things that relate to prison and ways that you don't always consider. If that transportation systems are having a real issue around New Orleans, we know that's going to impact visitation here because some people rely on buses to get from New Orleans to Angola. If we know something's going on, we're going to get a camera, we're going to go cover it. I am the same prisoner as the guy who's in the field, really, when it all boils down to it. The fact that I might have certain skills or background that got me a better position doesn't change the fact that I'm still a prisoner at Angola with a DOC number. But within those boundaries, I do not have to allow myself to become institutionalized where I accept that I can never have a greater ambition than just be a prisoner here. My goal and my ambition involves freedom. It involves returning to my family. It involves repaying those debts I owe my family for the support and the belief that they have in me. It is not to stay here and fulfill a penitentiary job such as a dorm orderly or Angolite staff writer or tractor driver or mechanic. That's not what I am going to accept. I'm a Hilburn. That's who I am. What I am is a prisoner. I'm going to follow the path to who I am. Everything else is just something I'm doing in the meantime. I've known guys with life sentences who, after their visits fade away, their outside support fades away, their hope basically fades away. They become what we refer to as institutionalized. They accept life in prison is their reality. I've seen guys burn their transcripts so that it's basically a symbolic gesture that I've given up. I'm not trying to go through court anymore. This is through the looking glass in every way possible. I mean, this is not the reality of what we're intended for. There has to be consequences for crimes. I will never argue against that. But should the consequences result in the destruction of potential and possibility? We've put people in Point Lookout who asked to be buried there because they said, that's where my family is. They basically accepted the fact that the family that they had on the outside is not their real family anymore. It's the guys they know here who have died or who are living on a hospital ward with no hope of getting off. This is their family now. And to be asked to be buried at Angola because this is your family, to me is the most depressing aspect of what a life sentence can do. Because I'm often asked, are you going to go home? I know without a doubt I'm going home. The question is how? Because my family and myself have made sure that if I die here, whether it's tomorrow or God forbid 25 years from now, my body will not stay here. I'm leaving Angola. I'm not going to be buried here. But somebody who says, I want to be buried in Angola, that's the saddest part of what a life sentence does to you.
When I come here, I was 17. I'm 80 years old now. Right. Yeah, I survived. So did. I wonder how I survived. I had a tough time. I come to Penitentiary in 1953. See, when I come here, it wasn't going to school and things like they doing now. You know, people were hard on you. They didn't care whether you get a trade or not. But it done changed now. It's different. They was working you. See, they ain't doing nothing now. Go out there and pick a little green, pick a little cotton or something like that. But when I come, they was working. Look, I still can do work, you know, I mean, enough to get by. Right. I'm 81 years old. You know? I'm still a down to rod in my dome. I'm gonna help them. Help them. I got point here. Third-degree burn But see, they used to sell cigarette lighters here and lighter fluid and all that. I had a dude throw something on me in the cell. I was in the cell, locked down in a block right over there, Camp B block. Throw some lighter fluid on me. Boing. At the time, I had been out of the shower, and they were letting them out the shower, out the cell. With some knows, he had the lighter fluid in the bucket and had it lit up and he dashed it in my cell. Home. Fluid hit me and bounced over and had 30-degree burn. 1/2 of my body. Lucky to be living there. And I went to New Orleans and stayed in the chatter for a few years. I had a few people seeing me in that angle light, like Reno was writing, and some of them went to write me. They called them pen pals. I had about 2 or 3 of them. It seemed where I had been in penitentiary, so well, he been in penitentiary, you know. But I had got a couple more on my list. They come see me a few times. Right. What it's for? And I don't know. I know one thing, I need to be out. Worst thing being in prison this long. I ought to go somewhere and make me a living. And start all over again. Yeah. They say the older you get, the more you learn. Well, I learned a lot of things, you understand? So, see, like I said, I've been here all my life. I ain't never really had a chance to get out, because I've been here all my life.
Sammy never gets easier for many of us. In addition to the men at Angola, I also interviewed 50 women at LCIW, and I just wanted to take a chance to maybe put that on your radar. We are still in the very time-consuming process of editing these interviews for what will be the sort of sister companion site to the project. Sandra Starr was the first woman I interviewed, and I'd like to give you a preview of what's to come by sharing her profile. And then I'd like to introduce our panel and turn things over to Professor Lancaster and the panel for a conversation with you. The women are in a different part of the project because the trajectories for women are so very different than they are for most men, and we felt the need to create their own space for that and to examine some of the ways that really coercive men, for the most part, intersect with the lives of girls and send them on this path. These are actually some of the issues that the Justice for Survivors Act is attempting to address. I know many of you are aware of that legislation. So let me go ahead and show you Sandra. She was the first person, and she's dear to us in our home because she was also my wife Becky's first client for the Women's Prison Project at Tulane. So I'm happy to be able to share this with you.
Okay, so my name is Sandra Starr, and I was arrested at 23 for the killing of my boyfriend. I was convicted of second-degree murder. I was given a life sentence, and I've done 25 years on that life sentence. My mom, I lived with my mom and my stepfather. We moved around a lot. We never settled in one place. I just remember moving around a lot. And there was love in the home, but it wasn't shown to me all the time. Although I wanted it, my sisters were very, very smart, gifted, and I was the opposite. I brought bad grades home. I always got in trouble. Everything I did was wrong. So that kind of made me believe that's who I was, so I acted out. I became what I thought they called me every day. You know, I wasn't smart enough. I wasn't trying harder. I'm the oldest. I should do better. So sometimes I did things just to be rebellious. It was abuse in my home. It was a hush-hush abuse. We weren't to tell people about it. It was grown-up business. Growing up, that's what I heard. I saw it, but in growing up, it was normal. I mean, the guys fought on women all the time. And it was just like they'd fight and make up, and it was okay. Maybe the woman did something. Maybe the man did something. I saw my cousins, my aunts, my uncles, my mom, and my stepfather. It was all around me. So nobody talked about abuse. I think it took me going through it myself to really understand, because when I got in a relationship, I fell head first in it, you know, into an abusive relationship myself. It happened so quick that even if I wanted to stop it, it was like a reaction to defend myself. When I was put in the police car, and it was just my mom and my 2 kids standing there. And that was like the hardest. I can't even get it out of my mouth. Because they were just looking like they didn't even know what was going on, why mama leaving. And today it's hard for me to see them as adults, because I still have that vision of leaving them as children, you know? So, trying to catch it up, but my mom, she had the same, it was almost like a stoic look, you know, like my child's leaving. So just like I left my children, I was leaving my mom. Her child was leaving also, so. When I first came, I was scared to death. I only remembered the prison from looking at TV. And so that was my belief. Thank you. That was my belief that that's what prison was like. So when I walk into prison with my bag, it was people everywhere. And they were looking and, you think that they, fresh meat or new offender. And that's what was running through my head. Who's going to attack me now? I didn't know anybody. It was too many women for one. I was scared. And I was just searching for a familiar face or somebody that I can that I knew to be with. And that was my only thing, that I was trying to find somebody, a familiar to cling to help me out while I was there. So I think after being there for a while, my first thing, I wanted to become a big sister. For other women that were coming in like that, I didn't want them to, that was horrible feeling. And I made it my business to meet every woman that come in the doors of LCIW, to make them feel comfortable, to walk them around and let them know where everything is, to help them get into programs and clubs and be active and adjust. At first, I never admitted the fact that I had life. I don't think I ever actually set it in my heart that I had life. And I always say that I'm not going to die here. Even at LCIW, I was always do things and say, I'm going to better myself. I'm going to do whatever it takes to get to, my children are going to know that I tried, And that was my drive every day. I went to self-help groups. Any self-help groups that they offered, I took them because I wanted whatever it took to better me. And I didn't want to be the same person. I wanted to be a whole new person. Mentally, physically, spiritually. I just wanted to, because I lived the life of an abused woman. I wanted to live the life of a free woman. So I started that in prison. I work in the library as a counsel sub. So I go to the library and I check and see if I need clients updated, people who need provisional custodies, clemencies. I'm learning. I'm still training. So I'm learning a lot of new stuff. And they say I'm a sponge in the library. So outside of that, I minister to people all day long. So a lot of people that know me know that I'm a peer minister. And they come to me with issues. And sometimes they're confidential issues. So we'll talk. I'll make time, availability. I make time. Sometimes I'm supposed to be at work and I'm with a person, or if I'm on the sidewalk, I was going to the chapel and I get stopped. I think what's rewarding is stopping for that person because I don't know what their next moment might be. Man, that was God. It was wordless. I had people to come and care for me, to help me, and just stand by me, And that was the most awesome moment. Somebody stood by me, for me, and stood up for me. And that made me want to stand up And when I was scared, but when they said yes, and another yes, and another yes, I just was floored. And when they gave me my answer, I couldn't move. I had to just sit there. The people had to make me leave out the room because when you're being told no, you can't, you're bad, you're not good enough all your life, and when you finally get a yes, it's just overwhelming.
Thanks. I'm hoping that we'll be able to get that out within a year. Lots of exciting programming we can do around that as well. And thank you again, Sam. Perhaps the most unexpected development of all is that some of our contributors, like Sandra, have come home since I interviewed them. This was completely unexpected at the time that we started the project. And actually, I'd like to ask the panelists to come on and join us on stage, if you wouldn't mind. Ralph, San, Bojack, Pastor Waters. The Visiting Room Project contributors who are joining us today came home through the pardon and parole process. Theodric Bojack Givens was one of the so-called 70s lifers and came home through the parole board in 2020. Bojack, September 14th, I think? Is that right?
Yes.
September 14th.
Made parole September the 14th, came home on the 17th.
Okay, all right. Sandra Starr was pardoned and paroled in 2020, in July. Ralph Dawson was pardoned and paroled just a few months after that in 2022, in May. And Pastor Waters, Darrell Waters, was pardoned and paroled just a few months ago at the end of November. Together, our panelists served a total of 135 years in prison, and I'm very grateful that they could be with us today. We're in this extraordinary situation where they have become full partners in the local and national programming and community engagement that we're doing around the project, and I want to give the rest of the time that we have to them. So, thank you for joining us.
I want to thank all of you for being here, and it's great that all of you are here. We watched, narrative stories of Bojack and Sandra that were all recorded while you were incarcerated, and for those in the audience, you can access the Visiting Project's website and see the archives of all the interviews that have been posted. And we heard a little bit about your process in getting out. Bojack, you went out through changes of the law in 2017 that gave you parole eligibility that you originally had at the time in which you were sentenced. But during your course of incarceration, that was taken away from you and then given back with reforms in 2017. Pastor Waters, Ralph, and Sandra, you all came through the clemency process and were eventually paroled. My first question is that process, because you have obtained release. We know approximately 5,000 lifers remain in prison in Louisiana, so this process leaves a lot of people behind. So my question is your experience with the process of obtaining your release. What, during the course of your incarceration, sort of continued to push you forward in your desire and efforts and to get ultimately released? What inspired you and drove you that entire time? Sandra, I'll start with you.
I think I sat in the wrong seat because I think me and you in the wrong seat because I'm going first. I think what drove me and what continually drives me is the silence of domestic violence. I think because I didn't even realize that I was a victim. And through the education and through the leadership, it built hope in me. I realized I was a survivor. And I know that if I was like that, how many other women that was incarcerated with me, which inspired me to become a mentor of it inside the prison to teach domestic violence. So how many I left behind that has not realized they're a victim or that they're a survivor? So I think my continual drive today is awareness, not only for the mother or sister or daughter, but for those kids because they suffer as well. I think that's what I do every day because, like I said, I didn't even realize. And walking around with these women that I basically grew up with, feel the same way I felt. So that's what keeps me going, knowing that if I can just reach one to help them realize, and then to become an advocate.
OJ?
Well, mine's been twofold. Number one is that a group of people, group of legislators got together and took a gamble on us when they changed the law, made the new law to allow us to be eligible for parole. I eased out. I made the parole. But look how many people I left behind. I know everybody that I left behind is going to be there if I do something wrong. The next legislation section is not going to amend nothing to allow them out. So I got to take and turn around and be an ambassador and show them that, hey, man, relax. You took a gamble. You gambled on me. There's others that you can leave back there and take a gamble with. When I first, not only that, you got the youth out here today. The youth. See them right there over there? Stand up. Jake. Stand up right there. Coach Jake, make them stand up. See this shirt right here? Givens Woodwork. I open my own business up. They're my students. I teach school 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Trying to give them a trade so they don't have to break in nobody's house, where they don't have to rob nobody, where they can make an earnest living. I know what I do is going to reflect on the guys I left back there. The people that got to make the decisions, they're going to say, hey, look what they're doing. There's a few of them like that. Let's take another chance with them. If you look at each one that got out and been prosperous, Calvin, Marcus spoke about Calvin. Calvin was teaching law while he was there. When he got out, he going to school. He getting ready to graduate now. That's a plus. Look at Norris, what Norris doing, getting everybody right, bringing their families to learn how to vote. Look at Buff, what he doing? He was doing law work up there. He working in the DA's office. These are positive things. The newspaper just want to talk about negative things. They don't talk about this positive stuff. So I'm trying to let them to see See the program Marcus now doing? The program you're doing, exposing people that if something good can come out of Angola.
Yes.
Thank you.
I think what drove me was my sense of purpose. While I was incarcerated, and still today, that same sense of purpose. I believe that every soul is redeemable. And while I was incarcerated, I would wake up many a morning preaching to my people the gospel of liberation, peace. And after serving my community at Angola for many years, I knew that God had a bigger stage for me. I would try to, preach and teach on the phone. I would try to do the best I could, but there were just so many restrictions. Prison was very inconvenient. And I knew that if I would just continue to stay positive and continue to be purposeful, that one day I would be free to fulfill my destiny. And November the 30th of last year, that day came, and it was awesome. And since that time, I've been working at Louisiana Parole Project by day, during the week, and having my fun, preaching on the weekends. And so it has always been about purpose. I believe that we've all been called to love, to uplift humanity, to help others to become the best version of themselves, and to model that life of high morals, love, and peace. That is what fueled me.
Being in prison in and of itself is motivation to want to get out. I would have to agree with Brother Darrell in living a life of purpose, to being motivated. Angola sits at the end of Highway 66. It is at the end of the road, but I did not believe that I was at the end of my road. I didn't believe that Angola was my destiny. Like Sandra said, that she never actually swallowed the thought or the idea wholly that she would die in prison, that she had a life sentence. It's something that stares you in the face every morning when you wake up, but at the same time, you just somehow know that you are not part of that number that's going to die in prison, hopefully. But you have a life there. You have, you can build there's opportunity to create a life for yourself there, a decent quality of life, comparatively. And so if you aspire to a better quality of life, you will pursue those things. But you can only create so much of a quality of life, and then you have to look, you're at the rodeo marketing your goods, and you see the rest of the quality of life that's available. If only I would take a few more steps, if I could just press just a little bit harder. So you wake up every morning knowing that the only thing you can do is keep walking. All you can do, just do what's in front of you. But you got to keep doing it every day. Don't lose your sight. Don't lose sight of your goals. Don't lose sight of who you are. Maintain your discipline, your self-discipline, but just you have the motivation is, it's right there. Keep your eyes on the prize. It's right there. All right. Just keep pushing. Just keep doing what you do every day. Just do what you know to do is right, and you're going to be just fine. And if you don't make it out, you've been a better person anyway. You feel better, you look better. But I was motivated and encouraged by employees I work with. I work closely with management level employees, and Francis Abbott, and I almost had to be persuaded to submit my clemency application. I mean, it wasn't that I was comfortable, it's just I didn't think I was good enough to get the recommendation. I didn't think I had done enough, I didn't see it, too close to see it. But they motivated me, they went out of their way to convince me that, man, it don't hurt, go ahead, try it. Here I am.
If people have questions, Kelly, you can get questions. Just an additional question. Bojack, you actually talked about in your interview, potential and possibility. And the interviews that we have with the Visiting Room Project are all narratives in your perspective while you've been incarcerated. And now that you're out, I want to sort of pick up on this idea of potential and possibility, because the narrative continues, right? Bojack's point about you now being the voice and the example of potential and possibility for all the people who remain in prison. Share and tell us what you're doing now, what your goals are, what have you been doing since you've been released, what your goals are, to sort of carry forward that narrative story that's so impactful even while you were inside, but it's even more impactful now that you have the opportunity to be in the community and demonstrate it, to live it out for everyone to see. You can go first, Bojack. And
well, first of all, also, we're talking about us, okay? All right? And I spoke earlier about setting an example to reach back for the other guy. But also, my hands go out and I ask everybody to support the Parole Project. Because when I come home, I didn't have no place to stay. All my family was dead. They put a roof over my head. Ashley turned around and showed me how to use a cell phone. When I left the street, they had a pay booth on the corner. You put a coin in it and you call. A big yellow pages. I don't see that. My only obstacle since I've been out here is that cell phone. They took me by the hand, showed me how to go open up a bank account, how to go get my driving license. So they've been setting examples. They reached back. They was ex-prisoners. So I think my hat go off to them. And I ask everybody to support them people. Now, getting back to your question, listen, I just want to live. It's all I want to do is live a good life, a simple life, and try to set an example and help the next person. See them kids? That's my heart. I don't want to see them have to go through what I went through. So that's what I'm doing. I'm trying to reach back, grab the kids, keep them off the street. They become like my sons. I want to know where their report cards at. I had them the other day, and I talked with the guy, Coach Jay, sitting right there with him. And I asked him, show me 2 inches. Show me 1.5 inches. Go up to 2 inches. See if they get it wrong. I want to know how did you get a good report card? How did you pass in math and you can't count? I want to know that. I want to go talk to the teacher now. So I asked them about their homework. I asked them about that, because I'm concerned about that. You can't fake your way through that. I'm trying to show them that they can get a trade. They don't have to rob. They don't have to sell drugs. There's something that they can learn and make a good living. But they got to get the education. So I get a chance to stress the point about education. A lot of them love sports. I say, but at the same time, you can be an awesome ball player. But if you turn around and tear a ligament, you're damaged good. What you got to fall back on? It needs to be education. So this is why I take my time with them. I don't expect for them to be where I'm at mentally, but at least let them see. So this is what, that right over there. I asked him, what you do? Did you get your present for Christmas? Did you get everything? He said, I didn't get no Xbox. I said, I got you. So I brought him Walmart too. I said, told the lady, what's an Xbox? He said, I said, I don't know nothing about that. I said, talk to the lady. I said, it's for him. And I told him, Pick out what you want. He got some kind of Xbox 4 or 5. I don't know what it is. I just paid for it, you know. And the other one, you know, I looked at the other one. That's because they put some effort out when they come to the shop. He took a sand, some cheers. I mean, he put the work in. He had the other one. I looked at his shoe. The shoe was run over. I said, come go with me. I said, pick out a pair of shoes, huh? I said, get your pair of tennis. You know, so it's giving back. You know, it's not about the money teaching the kids. It's about letting them know that they're worth something. See, kids are the greatest, the wealthiest and the greatest resource on this earth because they're the future. If you instill in their head now, those going to be your next politician, your next mayor, your next governor. But you got to steer them on the right path. And it takes us to do that.
Thank you.
You made me forget the question.
Reverend Waters or Ralph or Sandra, the potential impossibility, the continuation of the narrative now that you're out. What is it that you want to share relating to your sort of putting forward and demonstrating the potential impossibility that existed within you while you were incarcerated, and now you have the ability to share it, and we all have the ability to experience it with you?
Okay, first of all, remember I told you that I didn't realize I was a victim. I'm a survivor, and I'm also living a married life now. Something I didn't think I'd ever deserve. So you're getting to share that with me. My husband, lovely husband right here. I call him Babe, so everybody else calls him Babe. I think what I've come to realize, and to the men issues are different from the women issues. The needs, legislation, it's all different. So working with the task force as sexual or domestic violence, trafficking issues, I'm there because yes, some men would have a say on that, but the woman would dominate it. And I think the domestic violence could go both ways. But in the system, the male, not to talk about you men, get a slap on the wrist, where for the woman, it's thrown away. So I think that's my everyday turnover that I want to constantly stay in to help change the mindset that women, we don't want to be silent. We want our voices to be heard. We want you to realize that this is real, and we want something done about it. And if I have to show up at the Capitol all the time to fight for the women that are left behind, so be it. I was free, and I promised the Lord that until you take my breath, that's what I'm going to do.
Reverend Waters?
The life that I am blessed to be able to lead today is really just an extension of the life that I was living on the inside. When I was incarcerated, I served as an educator. I was the pastor of a church on the inside, and I tried to help everyone around me in some way. I mentored a lot, counseled a lot. So I'm doing the same thing. By being an employee at the Louisiana Parole Project, I have an opportunity to welcome my brothers and sisters home whenever they are released from incarceration. I have an opportunity to counsel, to mentor them. And also, on weekends, I go home because I'm a minister on staff at a church in my hometown. So I'm able to preach and teach in local churches on weekends and spend time with my mother. That was one thing that I promised myself that I would do, because she was there for me, always supportive. And I take time to just sit with her, knowing that she doesn't have to drive down that winding road and risk her life and health to see me, that I can be there with her. And actually, this is the last thing I wanted to say is, she decided to retire. And I asked her, I said, well, Mother, what are you going to do now? She said, I'm going to follow you around.
That's right, that's right, that's right, that's right. Take care, Mama, that's right.
Continuing the narrative is a very good way to put it. While you're in prison, people will say, and you'll hear them say that that guy there, he ain't gonna make it when he get out because he's doing all this foolishness up in here. And the thought is that the habits you create within the prison over a 30, 40-year period or less are the habits you are going to maintain when you leave prison. No matter your best intentions, you are going to stick within those habits. I still get up at 3 o'clock every morning. Almost. I like it. But I'm doing the same things that I was doing in prison. I'm doing them outside of prison. I work. On my job, I have a couple of guys I work with. I have a boss. And I try to be supportive of them. I try to be a mentor to them without them knowing it, you know. Encouraging, discouraging, doing those things to help them be better people, whether they want to be or not. When I was at Angola, I had friendships. I had a lot of friendships. Not people I hang with or I run with, but people that could depend on me, that I could depend on them. And they would come to me for guidance about prison life or about a social problem or a relationship problem, and we would talk. And in that way, I was a mentor to a lot of people. And in that way, I'm still doing the same thing out there now in the world, on a one-on-one, case-by-case, individual, whoever I run across, whoever the Lord puts in front of me, that's who's going to get it. I've got a 14-year-old boy that I spend time with occasionally, every other weekend, 3 weekends out the month, and he pays attention to what I eat, what I drink, what I do, what I say, and so I'm a mentor to him as well, more in a direct way that he knows that he's being instructed in better ways to do things and better ways to look at things. So I spent right about 9 months with the Parole Project. They were very supportive of me. As Bojack said, they put a roof over our head. I left the prison with close to $11,000 in my pocket from a rodeo, all right, selling leather goods. And that $11,000 would not have gotten me a hotel room. No ID, no credit card, nothing. I couldn't have got an apartment. Nothing. All right, so housing, most important thing leaving. Let me see, I worked July, August, September, October, November, December, January, February, March. So I'm 9 months now working for one guy. I've had one job. The one job I started with, the same job I have now. I've been there 9 months, and boss loves me. Boss crazy about it. But he's kind of crazy anyway. So the continuing narrative is that I'm slowly reintegrating, slowly building a natural life for myself. I just got my first apartment. It's got to have the smallest kitchen God ever created. The refrigerator door won't open all the way. It's not an efficiency. It's a one-bedroom apartment, but the refrigerator door, not even halfway. I mean, but hey, I'm not cooking for 15 people anyway. In the living room, I've got my little leather workshop set up, and I'm starting to set up shop, starting to build wallets in my living room, my apartment. Oh, well. But that's what I did in the prison. It's the same habits and the same things, working, progressing, trying to make more. I've got a vehicle of my own. It's not the greatest. I have those things that I need to get by, but I need to be working towards developing something more secure and stable for myself to become I don't know, I don't want to say a full citizen, you know, I don't want to live paycheck to paycheck. I don't want to sweat that every month. I don't want to sweat that note every month. You know, I want to have that money there, you know. So that takes work, that takes effort, that takes determination, patience, persistence. And Darryl will tell you, that's the fella I was in jail. Huh?
That's it.
I don't quit, I don't give up.
Thank you. Yep, we have some really good questions from the audience. Some of my students are in the audience, and I have two submissions that are really the same question. And since we're here at a law school, which is, you know, goal is to educate our students to be good advocates, to sort of lawyer for people in ways in which they tell their story and their narrative in a compelling way. I have a question, and I'm going to actually limit you guys to one sentence in your answer, just to get through some of these with our time. And I know you well, Bojack, so one sentence. So for what's the most important quality that you think and someone who's advocating for you should possess? What's an important quality that someone who is there advocating for your, you know, release or your goals? What should that be?
That got to be within them. I mean, what I mean is that
What's your expectation of them?
just be real with them. Just be honest with them. However the chips fall, be honest. That's it. I can handle the truth. You know, a lie gonna mess me up.
Okay.
Just be honest.
Any other thoughts?
I was represented by Jane Hogan on the pardon and parole board, and she was excellent in her preparation for the questioning that was going to come my way, and she helped me to form my responses in such a way that it wouldn't create even more questions. So, but the greatest thing that she did, the greatest quality, was that she was purposeful in what she did, and she forced me to do things that I didn't want to do. And I didn't want to do all that question and answer stuff, all that mock stuff, but she made me do that. And that's what prepared me the best for my hearings.
I think that if you're hopeless, trust on both ends, caring on both ends, because for me, I had trust issues, a whole bucket of them. And I thought that it was just someone coming to get my story and run off with it, like everyone else, just run out. And I'm still where I'm at. But they, like I've said previously, they kept coming back to see me. For a person who get a small amount of visits, I can't remember who said it, that the visits dwindle down. But that happens, and once that happens, anybody that comes, whether they just come sit in there, that's a visit. That does wonders for a person who don't get visits at all. So they kept coming and they kept coming, and you're right, they do force you to do things, but it builds hope in you to want to help yourself where you couldn't help yourself at the beginning. So I think it's trust and caring. It motivates you to want to help yourself.
Thank you.
And I've heard all the good answers they've been taken, so I just say I would like someone who would be very passionate about his or her vocation, someone who would really believe in what he or she is doing. So I would say passion.
Unfortunately, we've got one. Unfortunately, we've got one last question, and there are other questions up here that I know that are really important. And you guys are going to be available for the rest of the afternoon, so we're going to take a short break in a minute, and I apologize to folks that I did not get to your question, but I encourage you to approach Sandra, Bojack, Reverend Waters, or Ralph directly and ask the question. But we'll just leave on, and again, sort of a one-sentence answer, which I know is a challenge for this question, and that's the most important thing that you think that the public should know about people who are incarcerated.
The crime that they committed don't define them. They're more than the act that they committed. Don't let it define them. It don't define them.
Change can happen. I mean, you could go in labeled as bad, and you could come out as bad. But guess what? You can change to somebody greater.
Okay. They should be given an opportunity to prove that they are worthy of another chance.
You read that question, please?
Sure. The most important thing that the public should know about people who are incarcerated.
Yeah. That they've had hopes and dreams and desires and hungers just like everybody they know. That they are no different than themselves. It's just something happened.
Well, thank all of you.
I remember.
We appreciate your time, your insight, and thank you for being with us today. We're going to take a short break. We're going to reconvene at 2:15, and we're going to talk about the current state of the law and perhaps some policies and changes that can provide opportunities for folks who currently remain incarcerated on a life sentence. Thank you.
Okay.
So I want us to move from our experience to the first part of the program, which are narratives, the voices of people who are incarcerated, because as we know, we have approximately 5,000 people in Louisiana that are currently serving life sentences. The few that have opportunities for parole release, like Bojack, are very, very few of that number. Those that are successful through the clemency process are very few, given the number of people who are incarcerated on life sentences. So understanding those narratives of the individuals who are incarcerated and hearing from some who have had the opportunity to be released and demonstrate their success, I want in the second part of our program to turn to a discussion about sort of how we got here, how the law developed so that in Louisiana we have 5,000 people currently serving life sentences, and even more serving incredibly lengthy sentences, which are virtual life sentences, even though they may be a term of years. In reality, they are life. So we'll explore how we got here. We'll explore some of the recent changes in the law that have given some people opportunities for release, but have not reached the vast number. And we'll explore some policy changes, some law changes that may expand opportunities for individuals who are incarcerated for life. So with the second program, I do want to turn it over to Carrie Myers, who's Deputy Director at the Louisiana Parole Project, Deputy Director for Advocacy and Development at the Parole Project. And then we'll explore the questions about the law and potential changes with our panel discussion. And Carrie will introduce the panel. So I'll turn it over to you, Carrie.
Thank you. We weren't always where we are now. In 1979, when Louisiana created life without parole as its only life sentence across the board, there were 700 life sentence persons in Louisiana. Just over 30 years later, that increased sevenfold. That's an incredible increase. It was a stacking effect, exponential growth in life sentences. But you have to go way back. You have to go over 120 years back to see how we got here. And actually, going back as far back as 1886. Well, let me just start now. Right now, we have 27,000. These numbers are probably a few months old. Just over 27,000 prisoners in Louisiana. 37% are serving sentences of 20 or more years. That's life or virtual life. That's out of the entire population. 16% are serving life sentences currently, life without parole sentences. And how did we get here? Well, it can go all the way back to Act 72 of 1886. Back then, the legislature created a process where persons who were first offenders sentenced to life would get a commutation after 15 years. That was the minimum amount served, and it was a simple process. It was a recommendation at that time, they were called manager, not warden. And so the prison manager would send a recommendation. It would go to the board that was made up of the lieutenant governor, the attorney general, and the sentencing judge, and those recommendations would get signed by the governor about 99% of the time. Actually, Act 112 of 1890 expanded that from first offenders to all lifers. The same clemency application was now applied to all lifers. Act 149 of 1914, they actually created a parole law for lifers. This is just beyond, so lifers' release was actually a clemency process, a commutation process, which I think for the lawyers in here understand that there's no due process involved in that. But it was a process that was used on a regular basis. But in 1914, they actually created a parole law that says they had to serve a minimum of the minimum 5 year, 1/3 of the minimum amount of time, which was 15 years, which actually meant they were parole eligible at 5 years. A couple of years later, the Attorney General gave some opinions that says that was not constitutional, and so that was stopped. But actually, around 1924, 25, the Louisiana Supreme Court actually said it was constitutional. But by that time, Act 311 of 1926 passed. That's what we know now as the 10-6 law. So from 1926 all the way to 1972, lifers in Louisiana served 10 years and 6 months. That same process that had been ingrained since 1886, that recommendation, that process through the Attorney General, Lieutenant Governor, and the sentencing judge, the same process was used for well over 50 years. It was actually codified in 1942 by Code of Criminal Procedure 571.7. So it was not something that, again, somebody just made up and just said, tomorrow we're going to start releasing lifers. It was a process that had been codified, it had been in practical use for decades. This process stayed in use all the way up until 1972, when the U.S. Supreme Court invalidated the death penalty nationally in Furman versus Georgia. That created a problem in Louisiana. We had about 22 people on death row in Louisiana in 1972. And the political concern was that what's going to happen now? Most of them, or a good majority of those 22 people on death row, once they got resentenced, would then become eligible for release under 10-6. And that became a political issue, and Louisiana hurriedly in 1973 created a process of parole, life with parole after 20 years. In 1976, the death penalty was invalidated again nationally, and the legislature came back and then changed that life sentence life with parole after 20 years to life with parole after 40 years. In 1979, they changed that to life without parole, period. You know, in the thing about 10-6, I was going to say this, that the federal courts even recognized 10-6 as a legitimate process as early as the 1950s. The U.S. Fifth Circuit actually recognized 10-6 as a legitimate life or release process as early as the 1950s. So we just didn't get here, you know, we didn't do this for hundreds of years. This is a recent evolution. This is an evolution that had something to do with changes in the death penalty nationwide, and it had to do with a national trend to get tough on crime. Unfortunately, life sentences and the growth of life sentences, particularly in Louisiana, has had very little effect on crime. And that's simply where we are. However, we've been, since 2017, we've been picking away. Very little. You know, we look at this at Parole Project as an elephant. And there's an old saying, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. Okay? And so we've been taking little bites out of the elephant. And Act 790 was not about lifers, but it was about virtual lifers. And that went all the way back to 1990. And that started to release people who were serving sentences of 30 or more years without parole eligibility. In 2017, finally, the most significant criminal justice reforms in Louisiana in 30 or 40 years, Act 277, turned a U.S. Supreme Court ruling that said juveniles, you cannot mandate a life sentence for juveniles into a parole eligibility law that gave them parole eligibility, and you're going to see many people in this room today who have benefited from that law. So after now we had about 300 juvenile lifers in Louisiana at the time. We still have about 60 juvenile lifers who have not yet been released in Louisiana, who were serving time at the time of that law. Also in 2017, Act 280, you heard Theodore Gibbons up here earlier. When he was sentenced to life in prison, he was sentenced to life with parole. That was taken away from him, not by act of the legislature necessarily, but just simply by practice. In 1979, when they passed life without parole, they simply said, you have no expectations of making it, we're just not going to give you a parole hearing, period. And so those people sentenced between 1973 and 1979 were simply caught in limbo. And Act 280 restored that parole eligibility for that group of people after they had served 40 years. And more recently, last year, Act 544, 10-6 lifers. This is not the bill that we wanted. This was the bill we were able to get passed. This law actually gave parole eligibility to 10-6 lifers who pleaded guilty. Even though whether they went to trial or pleaded guilty, the sentence was exactly the same. It just became another political issue that during the negotiations of the bill, it was just get 20 people parole eligibility out of about a little over 45, or get nobody parole eligibility. And we know that there's 20 people who probably will not now die in prison because that law was passed. And to us, that's a bite out of the elephant. Currently, there are less than 10% of Louisiana's now 4,300 life sentence prisoners who are parole eligible. We have more lifers serving life without parole than Texas, Arkansas, Mississippi, and Alabama combined. That's significant. In this panel here, I'm going to let Andrew introduce this panel. This panel is going to discuss a little bit more in depth about life sentences.
Good afternoon. Andrew Hundley, Executive Director of Louisiana Parole Project. We appreciate all of you who have taken time out of your schedule today to attend this very informative discussion. I'd like to take a moment to recognize a couple of state representatives who have joined us today. First, Representative Denise Marcel, who has been a longtime member of the House Criminal Justice Committee and an advocate for second chances. Thank you for joining us. And also Representative Edmund Jordan, who has done a lot of great work in his legislative career towards supporting second chances and more equal laws. Thank you for being here, Representative Jordan. Before I introduce our panel, would like to talk to you briefly about the work of Louisiana Parole Project, where we believe in second chances. We were founded in 2016, and we're a nonprofit organization that provides reentry support and advocacy to men and women who have served long prison sentences. Most of our clients were once sentenced to life without parole sentences. We practice peer mentored reentry support for our clients, which means, fancy way of saying that we are former lifers who provide support to other lifers who are coming home. Our reentry staff are individuals who were once sentenced to life without parole, who received a second chance, who in most cases went through our reentry program themselves, got a job, became successful, worked through the process of coming home and finding their own success, and are now giving back by helping others who are coming home become successful. It's hard to explain to someone outside of the justice system, but we're creating a community, and no other way to describe it, a community of people who come home who support one another. There was a time not long ago that probation and parole, sort of the mindset is a felon cannot associate with another felon, because if two felons associate with each other, they're going to do bad things. And what we've proven is actually quite the opposite, that people who've come home after serving these long sentences can actually be the best peer to another person who's coming home, going through that same process. That lived experience is very supportive. And what we've seen over the last several years is it's lifers or other lifers, former lifers or other former lifers, best person to support them. And frankly, for lifers who are still serving, it's giving people a great deal of hope that not only may they come home one day, but if they come home, they may have the opportunity to be successful. What we know about long-termers, they are different. They're more likely to be low risk, to reoffend. They have high unique needs. The world has changed in the last 20, 30, 40, 50 years in prison, and good chance they have a lack of family support, not because their family's given up on them, but if you spend that long in prison, you've probably lost your parents, you've lost your aunt and uncles, your brothers and sisters may be spread out all over. The world's changed. Our clients are mature but institutionalized, and when we say institutionalized, we don't mean that they cannot function in society any longer, but it just means they've been in prison so long they've missed out on natural developments in our communities. So I like to show this picture mostly because I weighed 50 pounds less then, and it's a reminder that maybe one day I could get back there. But this picture is a perfect embodiment of who our clients are. This client, someone who was served over 40 years in prison, and this is actually shortly after releasing from Angola. Many of you know the Shell gas station in St. Francisville on 61, and we oftentimes stop there and get gas, and it's an opportunity for our clients to learn their first lesson. Many of our clients, if they've been incarcerated that long, they've never used a debit card, They've never paid for gas at the pump. This individual who you see is someone who's never going to commit another crime. He's been home for a few years now, and he's actually, given quite a bit back to his community. But he didn't know how to pay for gas at the pump, something many of you would take for granted. This isn't an indicator if someone should get out of prison or not. This isn't an indicator if someone's going to go back to jail or not. These are quality of life issues. What we strive, we see our work, we recognize that, yes, we're reducing what's already a low recidivism rate, but we're also giving people opportunities to be more successful, give them the tools to be impactful. So this was an opportunity to learn how to use a debit card, how to pay for gas at the pump. And I weighed 50 pounds less. So what I'd like to do in just the next couple minutes of my time is the best way I can talk about Parole Project is show you our clients. You've seen already through the visiting room project what someone who's served a life sentence looks like. I'd just like to show you a few more, because often we hear our clients here, you don't look like you've been in prison. You don't look like you've been in prison 20 years. What does someone who looks like they've been in prison 20, 30, 40 years look like? They look like us. They look like anyone we see at a gas station, in church, at the grocery store. This is Roselle. He was incarcerated for 44 years. He was actually one of our first clients who came home. The day that he came home, he learned that stage 4 cancer. His cancer had returned, and he was going to die. It was a very bittersweet day for him. So happy to come home. Affectionately nicknamed Dog by those of us who knew him. He was a very gentle soul, and he had had no contact with his family for over 30 years before he came home. So his last 30 years in prison, no visits, no phone calls, no letters. And we were his family. Fortunately enough, we were able to find family who didn't even know he was still alive. And he lived for 6 more months in the Shreveport area with cousins who took care of him in his final days. He was surrounded and loved, and he did not die at Louisiana State Penitentiary. Henry Montgomery. I had the good fortune to be there to greet Henry the day he comes home. I remember exactly what I told him when this photograph was taken. Many of you may know Henry is hard of hearing, and I told Henry, smile, they're taking pictures of us right now. And anyone who knows Henry will understand when I tell you his response was, what? but he nailed the assignment. There are many of us raise your hand or stand up if you're here today because you're home today because of Henry Montgomery. So we have at least a half dozen, probably 8, 9 of us who were once sentenced to life without parole as children that came home. I think almost all of us who are in this room actually came home before Henry. Mm-hmm. Henry served 57 years in prison. He's been home for about almost a year and a half. He has his own apartment. He dresses very dapper. And he lightens any room that he steps into, and he's a big part of so many of our lives, a big part of the community we speak of. Lloyd, life sentence at 17, paroled after 25 years, now a reentry specialist for Parole Project, giving back. Matthew, life sentence at 17, paroled after 33 years, also an employee of Louisiana Parole Project. Ronnie, life sentence at 16, incarcerated for 27 years. He's the chaplain at Mississippi State Prison today. Lewis, life sentence at 17, incarcerated for 25 years. Now a client advocate at the Orleans Public Defender's Office. Christy Sheremy, life sentence at 16, our program manager at Parole Project. Ivy Mathis, life sentence at 17, incarcerated 26 years. Now employed as a community organizer at Vote. I know Sandra, you met Sandra earlier. Most of the people who are incarcerated with life sentences in Louisiana are men, but we have vastly way too many women serving life without parole sentences. But fortunately, in our recent future, many women have had a second chance. Some of them have had sentencing reviews, a significant number of them through the Orleans District Attorney's Office Civil Rights Division, have done sentencing reviews and found that they were over-incarcerated, or they should not have been incarcerated in the first place, righting past wrongs. And in some cases, the governor has signed commutations for individuals that he recognizes it's time to come home, that their continued incarceration does not benefit our communities. So I have Roselle, but this is Walter Carey. It says Act 280 lifer. He's actually Act 544 lifer, a 10-6 lifer. The remaining people I'm going to show you are people who went to prison and were told they'd serve 10 years and 6 months. In this case, Walter served 52 years. 4 of these 5 men, all 5 of these men were given life sentences in Orleans Parish. 10-6 life sentences. They all served 50 years or more. 4 of them had their sentences reviewed by the Orleans District Attorney's Office Civil Rights Division and were found to be over-incarcerated. Getting back to, it's never too late to right a past wrong. One of the individuals, not only was he a 10-6 lifer, but he was also a juvenile lifer, and he was released through a parole board hearing. They're all home today, and they're giving back to their communities. They have greater impact in our communities than their continued incarceration gave to our communities. 4 other 10-6 lifers recently released. 2 of them released just this week, in fact. So what Parole Project has seen in summation is that individuals can come home. Individuals who were once sentenced to live the rest of their lives in prison can get a review, can get a second look. They can be brought back in the community. They can give a lot back to the community. And we're seeing that. This isn't a theory. 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, we had some lifers, periodically a governor may sign a couple commutations on his or her way out of office. And there was a very small group that we could study as far as their impact. Over the last several years, we've had hundreds of former lifers come home. Unfortunately, our lifer population isn't dwindling because we're still sending about that same number of people into the system with life sentences. So we've had a significant number of people who have had reviews. We're proving that there's a safe way to bring people home, to reintegrate them into the community where they give back. We're not cherry picking here. The recidivism rate for the individuals that we speak of is nearly 0. There's no other group that you can come up with, and I'm not the criminologist on the panel, but we do know there's no other group outside of lifers that have as low of a recidivism rate. But we have 3 experts that are here today that we want to introduce. Before I do that, would like to say thank you to Representative Vanessa LaFleur for joining us. Representative LaFleur is on the House Administrative Criminal Justice panel, and she has been an advocate for second chances in her short time in the legislature, and we look forward to her serving in our legislature for the next several years, we hope. I will introduce our panel one at a time and ask them to come and give remarks before we go into the panel portion. Each one of them would like to discuss their sort of observations within their areas of expertise. First, I'd like to introduce Ashley Nellis. She is the co-director of research at the Sentencing Project in Washington, D.C. She is a co-author of a book that many of you may have read called The Meaning of Life. She has an academic and professional background in analyzing criminal justice policies and practices, racial disparities, juvenile justice systems, and long-term imprisonment. We have asked Ashley here today, and she's joined us all the way from Washington, D.C., to give us a better focus of how Louisiana sits within a national system. Many states give life without parole sentences, and Ashley's here today to discuss the movement across the country and what the national landscape is as it relates to life without parole. Please help me welcome Ashley Nellis.
LSU shirt. Oh, if I can, it'd be great if I could plug it in. But if I can't, I can wing it. Yeah, I don't have a dongle. Yeah, I don't have the dongle. Yeah, if they have. Yes. Yeah, man. I was just thinking. Okay. That's okay. I'll read it. Hi, everybody. It is so great to be here. And I had the good pleasure of being able to visit Angola yesterday, which is not on the bucket list of very many people, but it has been on my bucket list for a while because I've been studying life imprisonment for about 15 years now. And, oh, here comes a dongle. Hold on. You know, when I joined the Sentencing Project in 2008, I didn't expect to just fall in love with lifers as much as I have. And I started coming to the organization. That's my list of to-dos. We'll get to that later. So long. And I just in 2008, at the end of 2008, and you know, Graham was 2009, and I started to, and then ruled on in 2010, I think, and I was involved in the data collection that established that it was in fact very unusual to sentence juveniles to life without parole for non-homicides because the vast majority of them were occurring in Florida. And I was really delighted to be able to use my quantitative knowledge to show, you know, to the court that, in fact, this was not a usual practice. But in the course of doing that, I realized that it was very usual to give children life without parole for homicide. And so that the work of the attorneys led to Miller and then Montgomery. And I, during the course of all those years, I did a survey nationally of about 1,600 lifers without the possibility of parole who had committed their offense when they were under the age of 18. You probably, no one in this room who had a life sentence will have heard of that because Louisiana was excluded from the survey because of ongoing litigation concerns. But it was the only state that was excluded from the national. So I'm sorry that I was not able to interview you, but I did interview many 1,500 others. And what, what was really clear was that the lives of these people was different, quite a bit different, and they had been victims long before they had become victimizers, and lots of other findings from that research. But so since that time, I've done 4 national studies of life imprisonment, and my area is around life with parole, life without, and virtual life sentences of 50 years or more. None of that is super relevant for Louisiana because your state doesn't even have parole for the vast majority of people, and it has such a huge population of life without the possibility of parole in relation to the other states. So let me show you. I just put a few slides. Of course, I was tempted to put a lot of slides because I'm a data person. I just want to show you the numbers, but they're pretty substantial. I'll also give you a plug that the Sentencing Project is engaged in a campaign this year that marks 50 years of mass incarceration that started in 1973. And we are really trying to get the word out to the public, the legislators, and to advocacy groups that mass incarceration, the pace of reform will need to speed up if we're going to see the end of mass incarceration in our lifetime or even the next. So it's probably not surprising to anyone here that Louisiana comes in first in most areas when it comes to criminal justice statistics. So in the U.S. nationally, about 307 people per 100,000 is incarcerated, but in Louisiana it's 564. That's second only to Mississippi. And sometimes you guys are first. Just this year, you're second. It's always a tie, a 3-way tie between Louisiana, Oklahoma, and Mississippi. It's often Louisiana. Looking at some other stats here that might be helpful to sort of put everything in perspective. In the general population, black people make up 33% of Louisiana's population. In the general population, the U.S., it's about 12%. In prison, 66, 2/3 of the people in prison in Louisiana are black. Generally, that's about 1/3. When it comes to life without the possibility of parole, 3/4 of people in Louisiana who are serving life without the possibility of parole are black, and just over half nationally are black. And then this is a couple of important things I want to share with you. So the under 18s, that's the juveniles, under 18 at the time of their crime. This is where we are kind of more or less now. So the 900 number is from about a year ago. Louisiana's number is from earlier today when I asked our friends at LPP what the number was, and it's about 175 people serving life without parole in Louisiana who were under 18 at the time of their crime. So you can tell just by looking that a large percentage of the national population of JLWOPs is still in Louisiana. The same is true for under 26. So that's an area of my research right now, the so-called emerging adults. It turns out that about 2 in 5 nationally, 2 of every 5 people serving a life without parole sentence were under the age of 26 at the time of their crime. That's important because neuroscientists are very clear that adolescent development does not end at 18. It ends in the mid-20s. So we have this, line of Supreme Court rulings that draws the line at 18, but it definitely shouldn't draw it, and it probably never should have drawn it at 18 because the science has been clear that it's under 26 as the age of full adult maturity, neuroscientifically. In comparison to the rest of the country, Louisiana has more people who are 50 years old at least now, but it also doesn't show that Louisiana also has a substantial proportion of people, the highest in the nation, that are over 65 years old. So it has a geriatric and elderly population that is really unsurpassed in any other state among its LWAPs. For people who have served 10 years, that's 80% of the people that have LWAP have already been there for at least 10 years. For the women, it's a slightly smaller population than the rest of the nation is Louisiana's. Yes. Do you mean? Oh no, I don't think so. I mean, I don't know. It's a very small percent. It's a small number overall. And in prison, generally, the prison is generally about 6% of prisoners are women. And among years served in Louisiana, the average length of time served as of about now is 21 years. But when you look at this last one, which is where I'd like to leave you, nationally, the number of people serving life with the possibility and this combined with the population serving life without the possibility is about 4%. In Louisiana, which is mostly life without, it's 14%. So what that really means is that about 1 in 5 people in prison, 1 in 5 to 1 in 6 people in prison in Louisiana today has life without the possibility of parole. That is a substantial change from a time, that Carrie was pointing out where we didn't even have life without the possibility of parole as we do today. Nationally, it's about 1 in 7 people, also horrific. But Louisiana is one of the top LWAP states in that regard, and in sort of many ways of looking at it, Louisiana comes out first. I know that that the stories are so critical to bringing these numbers to life, and I hope that that they are able to sort of give figures like this, which should be shocking to legislatures, the motivation they need to really change the laws. So I think I'll go to the next person.
Next, I'd like to introduce Dr. Edward Shahada. Dr. Shahada is a professor in the LSU Department of Sociology. I know that because when I was an undergrad student in the LSU Sociology program, actually did a research project under his supervision. Proud to say I made an A. Was very nervous because Dr. Shahada is a very smart man and knows his craft, and it was an honor to be able to do that research under his supervision. But Dr. Shahada received his PhD from Penn State University. He created the interdisciplinary CAPER, which stands for Crime and Policy Evaluation Research Group at LSU. And he also, in recent years, supervised the development of a risk and needs assessment tool that many of us know as TIGER. It is utilized by the Department of Corrections and utilized by organizations like Parole Project to help us better understand an individual's risks and needs as they come home to our communities. We've asked him to be here today to talk about some of his research specific to long-term and lifer populations who have come home in Louisiana. Dr. Shahada.
Thank you for that very generous introduction, Andrew. And thank you all for inviting me here today. I want to talk about a couple of things, just some impressions that I might have, and then, of course, we can all fill it in with the discussion. I've been here for 30 years. I've been at LSU since 1992, going on 31 years. But I still feel like an outsider in some ways, not in a bad way. I love this place. I've had opportunities to leave, but I just happen to love it here. And so I stayed. But I still have an outsider's perspective. I mean, I was born in the United States, not in the South, but I essentially grew up in Canada. And the things that surprised me, a couple of things that have surprised me in this, I didn't always do work in recidivism and risk analysis of people and so on. I did it in another area, but I got into it fairly late in the game. But one of the things that surprised me most as an outsider is how monstrously long the prison sentences are here. It's just unbelievable for children and for adults. I know someone close to me who was unfortunately robbed in an incident, and the prosecutor's office, I was the go-between between the victim and the prosecutor's office, both of whom I knew very well, and they said, well, it's 25 to 40 years. And I told that to the victim, and the victim said, no way. I mean, I can't live with myself to face a sentence like that. The sentences are so incredibly long. By national standards, by international standards. I mean, I know this is maybe your frame of reference, and that's how you understand it, but I can tell you from an outsider, it just makes my head spin. When I hear, and I see on the PowerPoint, that person served 57 years, that person served 42 years, went in as a child. It's unbelievable. And the other thing that I want to discuss today is how misunderstood recidivism actually is. I was minding my own business, not bothering anybody, and I got a call saying, there's a guy you need to meet. His name's Keith Nordyke, and he's a prison attorney. Many of you know him. I went, okay, fine, sure, great, I'll take any call. But you never know which call is, figuratively worth $1 or $1 million. So I took the call, and we chatted. And he said, look, we need to do a study for the state. They want us to look at recidivism for people who are released under Act 790, the geriatric, so-called geriatric thing, and a group of lifers who were pardoned under the parole board and released. I said, yeah, sure, fine, no problem. I had a grad student, when an academic tells you, yeah, sure, fine, they're not actually interested. But I thought, no, I thought, okay, here we go. And then he told me, by the way, this is the kind of study that could actually alter the shape of your career and your interests and could be the most meaningful to you. And I went, okay, sure. I didn't believe him at the time. He was so right. So one of the things that we found, we looked at, and it shocked me. Recidivism, the chances of committing another crime within 3-year or 5-year period. For one group was the group that was pardoned, lifers, their recidivism rate. The recidivism rate, now this is not a sample, this is the full population of people over a 20-year period. I forget the range, it was roughly 1990 to the year 2010. For those who were convicted of second-degree murder, their 5-year recidivism. I'm not talking about for another murder. I'm talking about a murder or stealing a Twinkie from the gas station. It is 0. Now, these are people who who were, for the most part, have spent a long time in jail. That's a low number. And for robbers, armed robbers, more specifically, the recidivism was 6% over a 5-year period for any. Now, I'm not including technical violations in that, okay, which are kind of a silly thing. But for another act that would send someone to jail, that would revoke their supervision, their release, and send them back, 6%, which is also incredibly low. Now, some of these people fell under the Act 790, which is specifically people who are over the age of 45 and who have served at least 20 years of a 30-year sentence. So this is an older population. and they represent virtually zero risk. And for second-degree murder, it is actually, not virtually, not almost, it is actually zero risk. And we spend enormous amounts of money, inflict enormous amounts of human suffering on a population that represents essentially zero risk to the community. And age and time served plays into this very much. After 27 years served, which is an incredibly long time in jail just by itself, the risk is essentially zero, regardless of the crime. Essentially zero at that point. It drops to zero. It begins to, after 20 years, it begins to drop down very, very fast. And then the other thing is about recidivism, is it is actually misapplied. The statistic is miscalculated and misapplied nationwide. It tends to place a lot of weight on who we call the frequent flyers, that small proportion of that population that is in and out of the system. So, for example, if I take these 4 people, and they are released. So we got 4 people, they're released. Now, first person doesn't commit anything at all, no problems for 5 years. Second person, no problem for 5 years. Third person, no problem for 5 years. The fourth person, sorry, I don't mean this in any personally, you've committed 4 crimes. They've been in and out of the system, in and out, in and out. The way that's typically calculated is it's an event-based statistic. That means this group committed 4 crimes. That's not actually true, though. What it's done is it's misapplied and overweighted that population that is at high risk for committing another crime, which is hypothetically you in this example. That's not actually true. In fact, the criminal risk for the first 3 people is 0. So it's not really the correct way to, it becomes an event-based statistic, and it's actually wrong. It should be incident-based. What is Andrew's risk? What is your risk? What is your risk? And what is your risk? That's how it should be. And when you correct for that, this national statistic that is often thrown around of 50, 55% recidivism or 5 years actually drops down to 30%. 30% is not the number we want, but remember, it includes a lot of young people, and they can go in and out, but it ain't 50 when you calculate it as an individual-based recidivism. Same thing with risk. It's the same thing with risk. When we calculate risk, there's a whole bunch of people, let's say they're released, a whole bunch of people in the low-risk category. There's a few in the medium and tiny, tiny in the high risk. And we need to understand that. We spend exorbitant amounts of money incarcerating people that are essentially low risk or 0 risk. And by the way, on the money side of the equation, which I know is not as important as the human side for me, I've heard, I saw a research study that showed that the cost, annual cost for the United States, everything, if you factor everything in, from what the state spends, the families spend on incarceration yearly, it approaches $200 billion a year, $185 to $200 billion a year. Billion. The cost of the Apollo Moon program, not per year, but for the entire, from 1960 to 1974, in adjusted dollars, was $209 billion. We spend every single year the equivalent of the entire Moon program over that 13, 14-year period. It's an enormous cost. And of course, that's secondary to the human cost. So it was this study, the one I did with Keith Nordyke, that then prompted all my work in risk analysis and in the Tiger score and in figuring out a way to get 13,000 people released in Louisiana. And with that, I'll hand it over to the next person. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Shahada. Would also like to recognize Representative Rodney Lyons, who's with us today. Thank you, Representative Lyons, for being an advocate for second chances. Our last panelist is Natalie Laborde. Natalie is the Executive Counsel at the Louisiana Department of Public Safety and Corrections. Previously, she served as Deputy Chief of Staff under Governor Jindal's administration, and she volunteers as Chairwoman of the Louisiana Human Trafficking Commission and serves on the LSU Libraries Advisory Council. She is a 2009 graduate of this very LSU Law Center, so I know that the Law Center is excited to have her back in the building. And we'd like to call on her to speak about, from the Department of Corrections perspective, how people within the system who are serving life without parole, how has that changed over the last several years, and what they're seeing within the department when people who are serving the sentence go home and get a second look. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm certainly, you've referenced 3 experts here, but I am certainly not an expert in the way that you all are. But I'll kind of give an overview through the lens of my own personal story, and not to highlight myself, but I think my own story kind of highlights the policy change here in Louisiana. So if you would have told me, even when I was in law school, that I'd be working at DOC, I kind of just, I would have been confused. And not because I wasn't passionate about social justice work, but I was involved heavily in anti-human trafficking, and I just was very much on the other side, on the victim assistance side. But I landed right out of law school working for the then executive counsel for the previous governor. And just doing civil work, but my first task really for the first year was reviewing pardon files. So stacks would come over and I was to do an assessment, make a summary, and then, every couple months the governor would look at them. And I remember the first set of clemency files, and I didn't understand them because, I remember my first year of law school when we learned about actus reus, mens reus, and then I memorized all these crimes to dump on the bar exam, but that was the extent of it. So that was just what I reviewed, those files constantly, and there were so many faces in there that honestly that I know today have become good friends that I think, gosh, 15 years ago, this kid was looking at these files. But fast forward, you work in a governor's office, you keep your head down, and you rise up pretty quickly. And one day, my boss was fired. I came in, she wasn't there anymore, and they called me in and said, we want to promote you to policy advisor. And I'm like, okay. And one of those agencies in my portfolio was Department of Corrections. And so that's how I connected with Secretary LeBlanc. And I started spending hours over there once a week to learn about the agency. And I remember he'd have all this data on his desk, and he'd look up and be like, prison population stabilizing, Allie. Prison population's going down, and he'd always say, we're at 40,000, we're at 39,000, we're at 38,000. So that's where I got exposed to all this. I started visiting the prisons where I got to know a lot of these guys. And really the thing that I'll never forget, it was the end of the administration. And so we had staff meetings every morning at the mansion. And again, some of my friends are here from that. And I remember realizing a couple years in, I didn't even know that these guys were prisoners, were lifers. And so again, you develop relationships, you get to know everyone. And I'll never forget, Jindal pardoned one inmate, and he was out of town. So I was the person to tell him that he had received clemency. And it's still to this day one of the most sacred moments of my life, really, to tell somebody else that they have a second chance. And so fast forward, and the administration was changing, and Governor Edwards was clear about that he'd be doing top-down reform, policy reform, and Secretary LeBlanc reached out to me, and I committed to 1 year to come and do the legislative side. But 8 years later, here I am, and really it's a testimony to the incredible people that we have in our system that sadly, but that's changing, that often society looks at and has thrown the key away. So back to the data that you all talked about, Louisiana, that was one of the things. So with criminal justice reform in 2016, starting with the Justice Reinvestment Initiative Council, we did the largest data study of Louisiana system that had ever been done. And over the course of that year, then that council put together a set of recommendations to the legislature, which included not only reforms to nonviolent offenses, but a substantial amount to violent offenses, particularly those who had served over 30 years, looking at that from the service length to the age length. But, negotiations have to happen through the process. So the majority of those things related to, quote, violent crimes had to be put on the wayside, except for the 70s lifers, which is the small group that Andrew and everyone talked about, who at the time that they were sentenced, they had an expectation of parole. And that's always been the biggest deal for the prosecution with changing retroactively life sentences, is that there was an expectation for the victims that this person would serve life. Well, by that same argument here, these people did not have an expectation that this person would serve life, so they were willing to move on that. And that was a small group of people that, as you just referenced, I think you said the recidivism rate is 0. And again, that was another monumental experience for me too, because I was tasked with arguing for the bills during session. And this will just kind of give you an example of what the sentiment was. A lot of those decisions were made, we sat in behind closed doors and worked these things out, and we were all ready to bring the bills on the first House side. And one of those provisions was the 70s lifers. And everything, both sides were working together, but one representative decided, I don't like this. So he makes a motion to strip it from the bill. And I'm sitting there, and I remember they called the roll, Andrew remembers this, and it fails by 1, 5 to 6, I think it was. And what was so important about that was, people may say, oh, it had 4 more steps, but we were just asking them to not vote on something, just let it come out of committee. If it would have been stripped, then you have to ask the legislature to proactively vote yes on a bill that's going to give, lifers parole eligibility. So that was so significant. But here we are 5 years later, and from the data perspective, it shows the recidivism rate is 0. But it's also so important because it's something that we can bring back to the legislature to say, hey, you were willing to trust the data and the stories and the people in front of you back then, and these same people who were clearly credible with their lives, but also with the data and information, are asking you to take a chance again. This is a tricky year because it's an election year, so you don't know where things are going to go, but I can tell you, as someone who's just now been 10 years in this, the sentiment is changing so much. And really the argument, hopefully life sentences will be eliminated completely one day. But in the meantime, I think a really strong argument that people really connect with is it's not absolutely saying life without parole. It's just the possibility that someone, an individual life, isn't remembered for the worst decision they ever made, and not considering the next 25, 30 years of all the things that that person has done while in prison to better themselves, to make amends, to make things right, being willing to revisit that. Because I think the legislature is concerned with the notion of just completely eliminating it, but it's saying, hey, let's look at this sometime later and ask and let the parole board consider whether or not this person should receive parole. So that's where I think the sentiment is really changing now for us within DOC from the very beginning. And so again, it's still surreal to me to see so many of these guys here home, because I'm still used, it takes me off guard because I'm used to seeing them at LSP or at Hunt, et cetera. But I remember from day one since I've been there, Secretary, we would walk into whatever prison and he would say, Big Lou doesn't need to be here, so-and-so doesn't need to be here, so-and-so doesn't need to be here. So there's been champions for this inside of DOC. I think Andrew can attest to that too, of people who've really kind of grown up and alongside people who are in prison. And certainly our agency is not perfect, and we've really implemented or attempted to implement a lot of changes internally and just the way that we see corrections as a whole, especially on the probation and parole side, which is success is helping someone successfully complete their supervision. It's not looking for another reason to bring them back in. And that was a big cultural change. So I know also internally we have such an aging population of people who are not a risk to the public. I mean, I'm sure many of you have been to LSP and you've walked through some of our hospice units and then some of our medical wards. And just from a financial perspective for the state, we're paying for 100% of that medical care for people who, if they were able to become eligible to release on medical parole, which you're not if you're first or second degree murder, can go into a hospice system or a medical system where Medicaid dollars would pay for it. So just from a financial perspective for the state, it doesn't make the most sense. And that was something else that we tried to change during the 2017 reforms. And again, it got tabled. But I guess I would close with that is to say, the example you gave about our incarceration rate compared to the national, we are certainly, we go back and forth between Oklahoma and Mississippi, but the good news there is I remember when it was 850, and now we're in the 500s. I remember when the population was 42,000, and now we're at 26,000. So it is an elephant that you eat one bite at a time, but it's changing. And just, again, as a new generation, I think, becomes the leadership within our legislature, they're much more policy, I think, driven than necessarily party driven. I do believe there will, in the next couple of years, be a change to life with parole. And again, I should have said this from the beginning, but he's not here. But I can't say enough good things about my boss, Secretary LeBlanc, who really, he's the one who exposed me to this world. And he is the true definition of a public servant. And so many of the faces here are a product of what he's been doing inside and plowing concrete many, many years before. So just wanted to give him recognition, as y'all always do so well. Thank you. But with that, I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you. And just asking this one more time, if you don't mind, sorry to put people on the spot, but for anyone who got here late, just as a show, as people may wonder who's in the audience today, if you were once told that you would die in prison, please stand up. Please sit. These are individuals who are not just home today, but are giving back to their community. They're taxpayers, they're givers, they're volunteers, they're members of our local churches, and they have so much to offer. They're leaders, and they're actually making the public safer by being home than us spending so much money for their continued incarceration. Thank you for allowing us to recognize you again. So we have about 30 minutes left, and I have some questions for the panel. I'm going to ask anyone who may have a question. Kelly Garrett will be in the back of the room. Please let her know the question you have, and we'll recognize you. But we have a few questions that I'd like to call upon our panel members to go in a little deeper to some of the issues that they covered. And I'd like to start with Ashley. Can you give the audience a little bit more information about, as we talk about eating this elephant one bite at a time, can you talk about specific reforms in other states over the last couple of years? What are other states doing that potentially Louisiana could mimic?
Sure. So, Louisiana's attempting many of those, but, by and large, just reforms that allow certain subpopulations a second look. Sentencing Project, like Louisiana Parole and many others, feel that all lifers should get a second look. But we also recognize that the rest of policymakers are not with us completely on that because of racialized fears mostly. And so the idea is to take it piecemeal. So, for instance, working on felony murder, people who are not the main trigger person in a crime, and trying to get parole eligibility or a second look somehow, back into court, resentencing, that kind of thing. For somebody who was not the main trigger person in a crime. Persons who were victims of domestic violence and committed their homicide in response to either directly responding to domestic violence or because of trauma, because of having been the victim of domestic violence. So they don't necessarily have to have killed their abuser, but even people who committed a homicide because they were the victim of domestic violence. So New York passed a law in 2019 called the Domestic Violence Survivors Justice Act, which allows people who qualify under that law to get another day in court And they had to, of course, make some compromises that are unfortunate. First of all, the people convicted, the worst part is people convicted of first degree are ineligible. But everyone else is eligible. Another sort of bargain they had to give is that people had to have served over 8 years already. Reforms to that law now are removing those, and in the hopes that any crime that qualifies, no carve-outs. So Domestic Violence Survivor Justice Act laws have been introduced in Oregon, a similar type act in Oklahoma. I know there's reforms underway in Louisiana and some other states where there are serious discussions happening around that issue. Also, geriatric release in New York and a number of other states, but New York has for many years now pushed what they call an elder parole bill, a parole availability for people who are in that state 55 and older and have already served 15 years, I think, maybe 10. New York is a state that is a little different. They do not have that many LWOPs because they have so many lifers with parole. They have 10,000 lifers with parole. That's gone down substantially, actually, in the last 7 years or so. But they only have about 350 LWOPs there. So these laws, they have to, take into consideration, the actual statistics, not to toot my own horn, but the statistics do matter. So in the particular state, you have to actually be, looking at where you're going to have the most impact. So for the lifers with parole, elder parole affects people who do have parole but moves it forward. And then there are states that certainly try to eliminate life without parole for anything other than the worst of the worst. And those are ways to sort of get around, the fact that we really like to just get rid of life without parole altogether. The Sentencing Project has a recommendation to cap all sentences at 20 years. That is, you leave at 20 years with the first review at 10 years or less than 10 years. For juveniles, for people under the age of 26, we recommend the total life sentence to be not any longer than 10 years with the review short of 10 years. So there's lots of ways to go about that, but that is our ideal and where we sort of set the bar, where we'd really like to see reform happen.
Thank you, Ashley. Dr. Shahada, I know people, this event's being live streamed. There are people watching who are not at LSU now, and people in the public may go, whoa, wait a minute, giving lifers, people who were committed of these crimes, a second look, like how do we determine who's safe? Are we just going off of our parole boards as the governor? Or are we just going off of gut feelings here? You spoke earlier about the risk and needs a tool known as Tiger that was developed at LSU. Can you speak about what does that tool do and how was that tool developed and who uses it? How is it put into effect?
Sure. So in 2015-16, we were anticipating some major legislative changes that would allow for the release of a lot of people. And in a nutshell, just to oversimplify, the DOC and the state, and I spoke with some legislators who said, we just can't swing the gate open. Is there some evidence-based way we can do this? Because Mr. and Mrs. Taxpayer want to know, what? This can only be done if the crime rates, not only we save money, but if the crime rates drop. So that was the challenge. And we used 10 years of data. It's been a little while now, maybe more. No, more than that. And data with 100,000 releases. And in simple form, we fed it to the computer using AI, kind of machine learning algorithms to get the computer to learn what causes someone to come back. And we got the computer to spit some stuff out. I mean, this is a long process because criminal justice data are notoriously quirky and poorly collected and so on, and they're siloed around the state. And so you get the model to learn. What is the risk? What isn't the risk? What are the chances? And then you go back and say, all right, computer, predict for me who's going to go back based on these previous data. You don't tell the computer who's gone back and who's done well. You just say, go ahead, and then you just see how well it predicted. And then you go back and do it for, again, then add another year to it, and add another year to it, and add another year to it, until you refine the model. So that's the risk portion. What we found was, over and over, is that the overwhelming proportion are low risk, but there's a few, small proportion, that are very high risk, that will need extra treatment and will have to be addressed in some way. And then the second part of that is needs. We have to come up with a needs assessment, because if you're not treating needs, people are going back. Some of them have some needs. And so we developed a needs test that measured needs, what they call criminogenic needs, on a variety of domains: substance abuse, criminal thinking, criminal peers, PTSD, mental health, more specifically, anxiety, depression, PTSD, I guess I mentioned that, needs on employment, on family, residence, and so on and so forth. And what that did, what that allowed us to do, is then say, all right, somebody's high needs on overall or on X, Y, and Z. Then we created what's called a treatment protocol. What do these people need? Because we don't want them coming back. They don't want to come back. And so we developed this treatment protocol. And then the other part of that was, where do they get the treatment? Because if you're living in, isolated part outside of home somewhere, well, there may not be a substance abuse treatment center nearby. So how do you do that? So that was a challenge as well. That was a little bit beyond my reach, but we had people help us with that. And as a result, 13,000 people were released under this protocol. And I can tell you that the people who were released have a lower recidivism rate under the Tiger protocol than those who were not, substantially lower. So, and this was made possible not just through a big federal grant that we got, but because of an alliance of convenience between left and right wing in this country and in this state. We reached a point in the mid 2015, 14, 15, 16, where the left, of course, objected to these incredibly long sentences on purely from a human rights standpoint. And those on the right saw prison as just another example of bloated government that doesn't work. And so there was this union, and it occurred in other states as well. And incredibly, it occurred here in Louisiana. And that's what made this possible. And then COVID comes along. COVID causes a huge surge in crime rates across the country. It happened in Canada. It happened in Europe. It happened all over. COVID made the homicide rates and crime rates go up. And unfortunately, these crime rates now, and they're coming back down, as we predicted, but they're being leveraged in these election cycles to oppose criminal justice reform. So that's a little bit of a headwind that we're running into, but it's one of the casualties of COVID. COVID caused a lot of deaths. It caused a huge disruption in the supply chain. It affected our economy, and it also may have jeopardized this relationship, this marriage, political marriage of convenience.
Thank you, Dr. Shahada. Carrie, I'd like to ask you to comment on something. You spent quite a few years at Angola, and you have spent your last several years of your career going back into Angola. Can you speak to the change in culture, specifically around the word hope if we think of what existed for years and what exists today as far as hope at Louisiana State Penitentiary, where there are so many people serving life without parole sentences, and how hope affects that prison population.
Well, hope was one time that people used to make the comment, I was one of them, that, you had to manufacture your own hope. It was simple as that, because there was no practical hope. It didn't exist. Release mechanisms didn't exist. Clemency was like winning the lottery. Very, very few people received that. And so it was something that generally you saw a very small group of people every now and then get that win that ticket, and that, or get a reversal in court, and that would kind of create some ripples of hope. But then you started to see some of the things change. You started to see programs that gave people opportunities to improve themselves come in. You started to see lifers be able to participate in those programs. You started to see the fact that doing that and participating and in getting those opportunities for that personal responsibility, for that self-improvement, changed their outlook. That changed the culture. That began to change the culture. The culture, the mechanisms were allowed from the outside, but the culture changed from the inside once that opportunity, and that created hope. Along with that, simultaneously, like Dr. Shahada was talking about, that there seemed to be some, starting in maybe the early 2000s, some changes legislatively. It was really, it was a very, it was not a linear process. It was up and down. But particularly in the last 5 to 7 years, one of the things that I see all the time is, and when we go back in, is to say, hey, look to your left and to your right, and who don't you see anymore? Who's not here? People who have been here 20, 25, 30, 35, 40 years are now home. And they are with their families, and they are contributing to their communities. And that is making a difference in ways that I think nothing else could. That reality, it's not one. It's not one in every 365 days, that someone sees. It's 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 a month. And it's making such a huge difference. And that hope translates into, to the entire system. The culture, it says that if I do the things that I'm supposed to do, that there is something at the end of this. There has to be something that motivates people, and this is, a lot of people you see in hearings. You'll see hey, before you even thought you had a chance, you started doing these things. Before you even knew that there was a Miller or a Miller Montgomery or an Act 277 or an Act 280, you started doing these things. Well, that's true. That's some very strong people who've manufactured that hope. But now it's telling everyone that there's a light at the end of the tunnel. You're not necessarily going to be thrown away. We have a long way to go, and they know that. There's just a small portion who are affected right now. But they're believing, and that makes such a huge difference. It makes such a huge difference in the lives of the people there and to the staff who run the prisons, and in the families of the people who are incarcerated. And so that culture is continually changing. It started as a ripple, and now it's kind of becoming a wave.
Natalie, I think if we think about sort of changes in attitudes over the last several years, I look back to whenever I first came to prison, and I think that the Department of Corrections and the wardens, the main focus was how do we keep people inside of prisons? How do we make our prisons secure? And especially as it related to lifers, there may not have been, or long-termers, there may not have been a lot of focus in how do we help them become better people? How do we help educate them? The focus was we need to help, make sure the prisons are more secure. Can you speak to sort of just the evolution over the last several years and, how administrators, how wardens, how Secretary LeBlanc, how those decisions were made that the department's going to invest more in educational programs and rehabilitative programming?
Yeah, sure. Actually, it's funny because this morning I was actually at LSP, at Louisiana State Penitentiary, and we were bringing a couple more judges to the reentry court program, and there's always great mentors and mentees that are giving an overview about the program, and Warden Hooper interrupted in the middle and said, I just want to tell y'all all that one of the biggest changes that has happened over the last couple of years was what had to change with us. And he pointed to himself, and he pointed to some of the other guys who are higher up assistant wardens, and he said, so he kind of gave that same history of what Andrew was talking about. And really, I think the impetus, and again, my reference is working under Secretary LeBlanc, and one of the critical stories he always tells when he was a warden at DCI, he always was like, my job is to keep this prison safe and secure and to be fair and to make sure people are treated correctly. But he never really thought about anything that happened when you leave the gate. And he spent a year as interim probation and parole director. This was like 20 years ago. But he always talks about how eye-opening it was because he realized, our job really starts. And again, I know this isn't relative necessarily to the lifer population, but it is becoming now. But it was eye-opening of, hey, our job starts when people leave. Doesn't end when people leave. It starts to help them transition back, be successful, a lot of the hurdles that come. And I think he brought that philosophy in when he became secretary now almost 16 years ago. And he had to bite it off in chunks. It is a huge agency. I think we're the second largest one. We have over 5,000 employees. And a cultural change like that is a big ship to turn. And he always reiterates about, how important it is that you do it correctly. If you push too hard, you push too fast. I mean, this is, the prisons, it can become volatile very quickly. And so the initial focus was on the staff and the cultural changes, and he focused mostly on probation and parole for a while, and then we really focused on the criminal justice reform side. So with the changes to sentencing, reducing those, expanding good time eligibility, and all this kind of came through the Sentencing Commission before changes in the 2017 legislation, but it was a couple years really, again, focused on the relief side. And once that settled down, he kind of swung the pendulum again of we need to now refocus again, now that we've gotten momentum, we've gotten savings that we can allocate on those cultural changes, both within our staff and increasing programming, now that we have more resources geared towards our longer term. Because the truth is, in a time where we had limited funding, they did have to make a choice a lot of times to prioritize people who were releasing. And, it's unfortunate and it's kind of upside down because anyone who works in DOC, you think, we know the guys that are serving 30 years lifers, they're not the ones coming back. The people who are churning in and out are usually the ones who recidivate. But to your question, Andrew, I think it is really, it has been a cultural shift. I came in kind of in the momentum of it, so it's really the only DOC I've known. But so when I hear the stories, it is so drastically different than the Department of Corrections that I know today. And I think the biggest push now is that, there's such buy-in with the leadership. There's such buy-in at headquarters. There's made up a very passionate team and within the leadership in our prisons, but it's really about pushing down in the trenches, at your lower level. And really, with the new officer training, we've expanded cadet training. It used to be 2 weeks, which just think about that. You come in and you're thrown into that environment very quickly, and it's kind of a recipe for disaster. Extending that academy, training people on soft skills, and I'm talking about our staff. It's very paramilitary style, and there's been a real focus to more of like a caseworker, social worker style. And so not only has there been an emphasis on expanding opportunities for people inside, but it's really been focused on the staffing and there's really been a cultural shift, and it's really at that point too where it's I think you see with attrition and matriculation with a younger generation coming in that I think in the next 5 to 10 years it's just gonna it's really going to have solidified itself within our system.
Thank you. Got a couple questions from the audience. In the little time we have left, I'd like Ashley and Dr. Shahada to comment on this. And I think that we'll have to consider this in the perspective of not just Louisiana, but other states that do and do not have capital punishment. What does the existence of capital punishment do to increase the numbers sentenced to life without parole, or does it?
So that's a great question. Certainly, you know, the falling out of favor that death penalty has had some influence on the expansion of life without parole. But really, it's more the case that life without parole has grown along its own track, regardless of whether a state has or uses the death penalty. And it really, it sort of gets the worst of both. Yes, when you get rid of the death penalty, all of those sentences are going to go to LWOP. But also, on the other hand of the sort of the reform spectrum, whenever there are reforms that you know, change the laws under the rubric of criminal justice reform, they often exclude the deep end, the lifers, the first degrees, the sexual offenders. And so life without parole grows as a result of that as well. So it's really, there are some states, like if you look at Massachusetts, for instance, Massachusetts does not have the death penalty, and yet it does have an extremely large life without parole population. Michigan is another probably a better example. Michigan has not had the death penalty since the 1800s. It has one of the broadest Eighth Amendment clauses there is. Something has to be either cruel or unusual in the state of Michigan and a few other states. In most states in the federal government, it's cruel and unusual. So even with that, Michigan has 6,000 people serving, well, not 6,000, but about, I think, 44,500 people serving life sentences. So it has a huge life population, even though it doesn't use the death penalty. So it's kind of a mix of both. But when you're talking about reform, it's so important that the death penalty abolition movement not throw LWOP under the bus, you know, not say that LWOP is really the more humane treatment, because it's not. We all know it's not. And so that's some of the work, you know, that we try to do. And on the same by the same token, when there are, you know, criminal justice reforms going on in the states, it's so important to look at all of those reforms and make sure they haven't carved out people who have been convicted of violence or first degree or things like that.
Good answer.
I'd ask you, Dr. Shahada, just to build upon that. When we, you know, think about deterrence, whether it's capital punishment, life without parole sentences, I think that, you know, the average person would think this makes sense. These deter because if people know that they may get capital punishment as a penalty or get a life without parole sentence, they're less likely to commit a crime. What do we know about that?
Well, it's well known that punishment has a saturation effect. So, and it kind of, the returns to punishment, there is a deterrence to punishment. We don't speed. Lots of people don't speed, not because they love their fellow driver, because they don't want to get a ticket. So we understand that. So there is a deterrent effect of things, but the deterrent effect saturates. You get what's called a declining return. So let's increase the punishment for murder from, oh, you're going to sit in a 6x9 cell for 4 decades, to capital punishment. Oh, then I'd better not do it. I can handle the first one, but the second one kind of bothers me. It's saturated at that point. And so one of the problems with these political responses to crime is that they're meaningless. every election cycle, somebody wants to grow hair on their chest, hopefully the males, and they want to show how tough they are, and they say, I'm going to increase the punishment for drug dealing or for whatever it is from 20 years to a mandatory 25 or 30 or whatever it is. It has no more effect after a while. It's not as though people are saying, I can do 20 years, but 23, no way, I can't do that. I'm going to get an MBA. It doesn't actually work that way.
Thank you. Carrie, I'm going to give you the next question, but I'm going to ask you more broadly, in a short amount of time, if you can capture, what are the possible pieces of legislation that we may see in the next session, the good, the bad, and the ugly. But the question is, I don't live in I don't live in Louisiana, but there is something called mandatory supervision in Texas. This means that if parole is denied, time served plus good time will allow one to be released. Is that up for discussion in Louisiana? So not only that, but also what is up for discussion in Louisiana?
So Louisiana already has a good time provision that if people aren't, there's a significant difference between discretionary parole, which is parole granted by a board after review, and good time parole, which is a mandatory release process based on a statute that says you've served a certain amount of your sentence. And people who are released on good time are under supervision till their full term date. So that's the significant difference. When someone's released on parole, discretionary parole, there's the options of the board putting very specific conditions on their release, on that supervision. And actually, the success rate of discretionary parole is significantly higher than good time release. So actually, when you talk about expanding parole eligibility, and it's something we've talked about legislatively, we advocate for actually more discretionary parole because we know it's more effective. And so that when we talk about, particularly about longer sentences than lifers, discretionary parole, or when you combine that with what we already know, which is the extraordinary low recidivism rates, it's just one more factor in saying, hey, if you put someone on discretionary parole, they're going to be successful 99% of the time or greater. As far as legislation coming up this year, I mean, there's a wish list, but there's two things. This is a fiscal year, and legislators only have 5 non-fiscal bills, so there's a limit on how many we're going to be able to file. One bill we know of that's already filed, and thanks to Representative Marcel, is in the pardon process. And right now it takes 4 votes to conduct any business on a pardon board. And quite often, though, and if you normally have a 5-member board, so it takes 4 out of 5 votes to get a recommendation. But when you only have 4 members and you can conduct business with 4 members, it is legal. It takes a unanimous decision, and that not only in commutations, but any business on the board. So there is a bill to change that when there's only 4 members to make it a unanimous vote, which is, I think, something a lot. I think it's technical to allow the board to conduct their business, but it's also equitable when you happen to have one person who isn't present at a hearing, and it changes the whole dynamic of the hearing from 4 out of 5 to a unanimous vote. That's significant. Obviously, we want to expand parole eligibility for lifers, and there's a significant effort to do that. But we are running into flack right now by saying that retroactively, it becomes a political issue to change something retroactive. When someone is convicted and sentenced, things are done, it's said, they look at it at some sort of comity, finality, and it's like, no, we don't want to change that. But that doesn't account for the fact that in 1979, when we created life without parole, we were wrong, period. And now we have to fix it. And it's politically, it's becoming very hard to say, fix it, just fix it. We were wrong, let's fix it. And that is becoming a problem. And the longer we wait, the more exponentially we keep spending money and adding lifers without parole. So It does have to be fixed. But when, there is a bill we want to propose that would create parole eligibility for a selected group of lifers after 35 years, second degree, first offenders. It's almost like a pilot program. We are already proving the data for the juvenile lifers who are coming home. No, the recidivism rate is 0. The Act 280 lifers, it's like just one more group, and in 2 or 3 years we can again come back and say, hey, it's just the same data that we already know is going to happen. I don't know if that bill is going to happen, because right now retroactivity, anything that's retroactive, is going to be opposed as being unconstitutional. And that's a position that's being taken right now politically. It's not, in my opinion, and I'm not a lawyer, but I've stayed at a Holiday Inn once, but the Holiday Inn Express, that's right. But no, and then there's another piece of legislation that I think is very important, and it was mentioned earlier on felony murder or principal. Person who is not the actual perpetrator, who happened to be there and had no knowledge of what was going to happen. They get this, under the law, they get the same sentence as the person who actually committed the crime. Judges have no discretion, and that's actually in Louisiana, that's probably the biggest problem across the board, that the legislature has taken discretion away over years, away from judges to sentence. We elect them, we have fought vehemently to keep electing our judges, but then take away their ability to do the job that we elect them to do by taking away their discretion in sentencing. And so that's just, that itself is an issue. But changing the law, people should never get a mandatory life sentence who did not kill anyone. And that's what's happening. And that is something that there's a bill there. It's being reviewed right now. And I think that's very important that we change this, that principals are less culpable. In many cases, they had no idea what was getting ready to happen, so at least they would have parole eligibility. There's a few other pieces of bad legislation that are coming through. Things like mandatorily taking away good time for violations of prison rules, like a disobedience and it's mixed in with some other significant issues like an assault on an officer or a medical worker. And hidden in there are these little slivers that say, if you violate a simple prison rule that you can get a disciplinary write-up for, you're going to mandatorily lose good time. So now what you're going to do is flatten out the time, and many people who are serving 85% sentences, now you're going to add 2 or 3 years and extraordinary cost to maybe hundreds or thousands of people. It's a bad bill. It should be stopped. And so there's a few things like that.
Thank you, Kerry. And we're at 4 o'clock. We're at the end of the day. I would like to thank Kerry, Ashley, Ed, and Natalie for serving on this panel. And ask Professor Lancaster to close us out.
Well, thank you, and thank all of you for your time today. Thank all of you for coming and participating. I want to thank Professor Konkar for working on the Visiting Room Project. It's just an incredible project. For those of you who have not looked up the Visiting Room Project online, please do, visitingroomproject.org, and you have access to interviews. Interviews for women are going to be coming. Those of you who are here today, I hope that you invest in this really important issue. I know many of you in the audience are invested. You are doing this work. Contact your representatives in the legislature. Follow along with what's going on, because as we move forward in changing this pattern of excessive sentences in Louisiana, we do need to be very proactive to ensure that we increase the opportunities for second chances for people who are incarcerated. So with that, just a reminder to those of you in the audience who are seeking continuing legal education credit, don't forget to turn in your slips of paper at the table out front so that we can submit those to MCLE on your behalf. And again, thank you very much for coming. And thank you to the Parole Project, the Visiting Room Project, for co-sponsoring this with the LSU Parole and Reentry Clinic. Thank you.